Welcome to my channel. Like and subscribe for more videos like this. I time traveled a little too early. Chapter 81 Latitude Projection. The pace of life in Karmatage is very slow. Since Karmatage's magic does not involve extending life, there are always groups of people who want to learn magic. But there are still very few people who can learn. Currently, the total number of people in Karmatage is less than 200. And some of them will be scattered in the 3 holy sanctuaries to protect the earth. There are also some mystics who return to society after getting tired of this life. George is quite accustomed to or likes this kind of life, sitting alone in front of the window with books and knowledge as his companions, a cup of tea. Although George has read all the books he can borrow, it does not mean that he has mastered all the knowledge. Therefore, I will borrow some books in the morning and evening and study them carefully. Today, what George holds in his hand is a book introducing the magic of Weixin Emperor. In the Marvel world, if you want to learn magic and start the path of magic practice, you must first have a strong desire in your heart and have a solid belief in magic or mysticism. Only by breaking the constraints of physical laws and reality can we have the possibility of communicating with a great being. A person who cannot believe in the existence of magic cannot learn magic. After having faith, then use the magic circle to communicate with Emperor Weixin or other latitudes to borrow magic power. In the end, it all depends on each person's mastery of spells. The so-called quality of talent depends on how much magic power can be borrowed from the source. Therefore, the body of Kamatage's mystic is only at the level of an ordinary person, and is still very fragile without the blessing of magical power. Strictly speaking, the mystic is just a loaner of energy. After using it, you need to absorb the energy through meditation and then return it. Like the source of Kamatage's magic, Vishuddhi is already the most positive source with the smallest loan cost, as long as the loan energy is returned in proportion. As for Dormammu's irregular source of loans, once you get in touch with him, unless you can escape, you will be dragged into the dark latitude by him and work for him forever, which is quite a trap. There are quite a lot of books in the Kamatage library, and there are also many more powerful magics in them, such as Icon's Journey, Vatum's Wind, Bosset's Thunder, Hog's Ancient Master Blog, Seraphim's Shield, Saratok's Scarlet Chain, etc., including the Mirror Space spell that George is more interested in. In terms of attack power, it is definitely greater than all the methods George knows. However, since these magics all involve borrowing magic power from Emperor Weixin, George did not practice it directly, but was thinking about how to modify this part. After George carefully studied the book Basic Structure of Spells and detailed explanation of runes, new inspiration came from them. George first studied and understood the part of each spell structure that represented Weixin Emperor, and then he had to design a rune pointing to himself to replace that part. In fact, George can also ask the Ancient Master for advice here, because in addition to borrowing magic power from Emperor Weixin, the Ancient One Master has also borrowed magic power from many latitude demons, including Dormammu from the Dark Latitude. However, since George was brought to Kamatage, George has never seen the Ancient Master again, so he can't find him if he wants to ask for advice. Fortunately, there is no shortage of basic knowledge explaining spells in Karmatage's library. It is not difficult to write a rune combination that points to yourself using runes. In this regard, after studying the runes pointing to Emperor Weixin, it is like having a template for writing an essay. It was also quickly broken by George. 3 months after George came to Kamatage, today George was in a sparsely populated valley, surrounded by at least 50 clones trying different combinations of magic runes. One of the clones, while the right hand continued to rotate, kept flying golden sparks, and a hole slowly appeared. Finally, the scene of the Hogwarts Island study appeared on the opposite side of the space door. George's body had already noticed the situation here when the clone drew Mars, so after seeing that the space door was successfully opened, he immediately dismissed the clones here. The successful experience flooded into his mind instantly, and George experienced it carefully for a while. Sliding his right hand, a golden space door leading to Kamatage opened directly. On the other side of the space door, the mages practicing magic in the square saw George coming out of the space door, and they all came forward to congratulate him. After all, everyone has gradually become familiar with this partner who was brought in by Master Guyi 3 months ago. Congratulations, Master George. At this time, a familiar voice came to George's ears. Thank you, Master Guyi. George turned around and bowed to Master Guyi. Seeing the arrival of Master Guyi, other mages also bowed and saluted, Master Guyi. After Master Guyi returned the favor one by one, everyone knew that the two of them had something to say, so they all left one after another. Guyi motioned for George to follow him, turned around and walked towards the tea room, and then said to George, I didn't teach you anything, you have to rely on yourself for everything. No, even with your permission, Master Guyi, I can't borrow books from the library. This has been of great help to me, George said. Knowledge lies in communication. Kamatage welcomes all those who are in awe of magic. Ancient One said. Speaking of the last time the two came to the tea room, Guyi waved his hand. After the tea set appeared again, after the two sat down, Guyi said, You are very talented in magic. You can do this without the Xian ring. You can see it when you open the space door. Master Guyi, is it possible that mages can only become borrowers and not the source of power? George asked. You should have read the introduction to the latitude demons in the book Space Analysis. Some of those demons were born at the beginning of the universe, and some abandoned their physical bodies to communicate with the ancient magic of latitudes in a space and finally merge into one. Master Guyi, after pouring a cup of tea for George, continued, the universe has been born for countless years, but the earth and human beings are still very young. There are too few safe and ownerless latitudes now, just like a drop in the ocean. Hard to find. From here, George also heard a hint of the ancient master's sadness for the masters of this era. George did not ask too many questions in this regard, but turned the topic back to the spell structure. After all, he had accumulated some problems before and needed to be solved by someone as skilled in magic as Guyi. For more than an hour, George continuously asked Master Guyi the questions he had accumulated during this period. Master Guyi did not hide his secrets, but explained these issues one by one. When talking about the spell structure, he also directly performed the spell step by step, allowing George to understand it more deeply. At the end of the conversation, George stood up, bowed seriously, and said, Thank you, Master Guyi, for your teachings. Guyi waved his hand gently and said, I hope I can help you. Master Ancient One, this is some magic knowledge I have obtained before. I have compiled it. If any mage is interested, you can take a look. There are several magics here that are relatively convenient in life. George took out the magic knowledge he had already obtained. The prepared basic book said. You are willing to share knowledge. On behalf of Kamatage, I would like to express my gratitude to you. You are always welcome to exchange magic. Guyi nodded and said. Haha, I will come to disturb Kamatage when I have time in the future. After saying that, he opened a space door, took a wooden box from the desk in the villa, put it on the table, and then said, This is me, I've prepared some tea, I hope you like it. Then I'll accept it. Guyi said with a smile. The two chatted for a few more words, and then George said goodbye and left. Use the space door to return to your own study in Hogwarts. Kamatage's portal is indeed convenient. It is not only safe to use, but also has a long distance. To be honest, operating in the Harry Potter world is very flexible, although it is uncomfortable at first. After taking back the clone in front of him and realizing that nothing happened, he walked to the balcony and sat down to make himself a pot of tea. Slowly thinking about the feasibility of the previous idea. Especially after communicating with Master Guyi, George became more confident in the implementation of the plan. However, you still need to wait and change all the magic learned from Kamatage before trying it again. That will be safer. Thanks to Book Friends THOR1999, Book Friend I am the only hero in the world, and Book Friend Kylan is not a demon. 3 Book Friends voted for recommendation. Thank you. Also, thank you for your comments from book friends. End of this chapter. Chapter 82 Cross-World Teleportation. Chapter 82 Cross-World Teleportation. After George's redesign and changes, many of the magics learned from Comitage have been mastered by George. Of course, some of the magics that require the cooperation of time gems are temporarily unable to be learned by George, and some other magics have been mastered by George. German National Weapons Research and Development Ministry. Dr. Erskine, you have wasted too much time. If the experiment continues to make no progress, I don't think I can guarantee the safety of your wife and children. John Schmidt said. Since he was assigned to this department by Hitler to be responsible for the research and development of new weapons, Schmidt knew that this was because he was implicated in the affairs of the Malik family. But it doesn't matter, he has also taken advantage of the situation to control the power of the original Markley family. It was by using this power that he took complete control of the Weapons Research and Development Department. However, after taking control of this department, the only project that caught John Schmidt's eye was Dr. Abraham Erskine's breakthrough project on human potential. After someone retrieved Dr. Erskine's family who was about to escape from Germany, the Erskine family who were originally taken as hostages were kidnapped by an unknown force. But fortunately, Erskine himself didn't know this. Thought his family was being imprisoned. For the safety of his family, he has been cooperating with the experiment. However, there has been no progress for a long time, which makes Schmidt anxious. Schmidt, give me some time. I have a clear direction and I will succeed soon. I want to see my family. I haven't seen them since I was arrested by you. Dr. Erskine said. When the experiment succeeds, I will reunite you. If you don't want your family to have problems, just work hard. I will give them the best treatment. After saying that, Schmidt left. Here. Head to the reference room. Recently, my subordinates have collected some books on mystery testing, hoping they will be helpful to me. Hogwarts Island. Fred, make arrangements, I'm going to the TV lab. George said. Okay, sir. You can leave at any time. The old butler Fred said respectfully. George is going to inspect the successfully developed TV project today. This project has been carried out for nearly 10 years since the establishment of the laboratory. With George's help, the first finished product was finally successfully made today. The car was driving through the street, and the car in front had a minor accident and was stuck in the middle of the road. Let the cars behind you stop. When the driver was dealing with it next time, George looked out of the car window and saw a thin 11 or 12-year-old boy on the side of the road. Several slightly stronger young men took away the food packaging bag in his hand and pushed it forward, next to the alley. Then, George watched with great interest as the little kid ran rampant against several boys who were much taller than him. At this time, a boy who was obviously taller than other children passing by on the side of the road rushed into the crowd after seeing the scene in the alley, and attacked other boys together with the skinny boy. After a scuffle for a while, the boys were clearly at a disadvantage. The few boys shouted out, then quickly left the alley with the food they had grabbed. With George's hearing, he could hear the other person's words completely. The thin boy who had just been beaten to the ground quickly stood up and called to the boys who had just run away, "Come on, I can fight with you all day." The last boy who came in said, "Okay, Steve, they have run away. Why are you fighting them? Just give them your things next time. At least you won't get beaten, right?" "Thank you, Bucky. But my mother said that people like me who are easily bullied must not back down. If you do it once, you will never get up again." The young man rubbed the place where he was beaten and said with firm eyes. Listening to the names of the two boys talking, Steve and Bucky, I felt familiar. George couldn't help but think that it couldn't be those two. But considering the age, it's not impossible. George would generally not take the initiative to contact many characters in the Marvel world. To prevent yourself from bringing too much change to the later plot. After all, knowing the plot lines well is also an advantage. In the absence of benefits, George felt it was better to keep the original storyline. If there is a time planning bureau at this time, it would be a loss to imprison yourself because of your own chaos and interference that touches the sacred timeline. However, without affecting the direction of the entire plot, it does not affect my ability to have some interactions with these people. Therefore, after returning to the island and asking someone to investigate Steve's current situation, George arranged for someone to cure Steve's mother of tuberculosis with reasonable reasons, and then arranged for her to have a job at his home hospital. After the nurse went to work, she no longer cared about Steve's affairs. At night, the weather is very good today, and you can see the sky full of stars from the balcony. There are many children playing on the lawn in front of the castle. Seeing the harmonious scene in front of him also made George feel calmer. There are more important things to do tonight. Use apparition to go to the room of requirement, set up the room as a quiet room, and sit cross-legged on the futon in the middle. George first took back all the clones he had given out, because George would not allow any mistakes in what he was doing. A lot of memories of clones rushed into his mind instantly, but under the powerful thinking, they did not have the slightest impact on George. Using the meditation technique he learned from Karmatage, after meditating quietly for a while, George opened his eyes again. Karmatage's meditation is a skill that George will practice every day after learning it. Because when George used meditation for the first time, he discovered that meditation could help George form a good flow between the energy in his body and the energy absorbed from the space in the chaos bead. The total amount of energy in the body will also slowly increase. The most important thing is that this can drive the chaos bead to absorb energy from the outside world faster. This is the only way George can use the chaos bead to absorb energy quickly so far. So after that, George meditated for a certain amount of time every day. After suppressing his complicated thoughts, George appeared in the chaotic space with a thought. The current appearance of the chaotic space is greatly different from before. Not only is there a vegetable garden with various vegetables, there is also a large medicinal field specially set aside by George next to the vegetable garden. George grew many medicinal herbs that could be used as medicine. Not only was it divided into several areas, but a stone platform was also built in one corner. This was specially prepared by George for this experiment. The entire stone platform is made of rock. Under George's transformation magic, it looks like a scaled-down pyramid. It's just that a hexagonal magic circle is carved on the top of the pyramid. This magic array is a cross-border teleportation array that George redesigned using runes based on the summoning array and teleportation array. Its function is to transport George's clone to the 3000 worlds above his head. George would not dare to do this experiment in the main world, that is, the Marvel world. At least Master Guyi would not allow it. Moreover, in his own little world, George has absolute control. If he accidentally opens some bad latitude and attracts creatures from other latitudes, George can handle it himself. It won't have any bad impact on the real world. The most important thing is that here is the most important part of the teleportation array, which is the coordinates. Yes, every time George drew items from the 3000 worlds before, it was equivalent to a transaction in that world. If you can trade with it, of course there is the possibility of time travel. Since this was his first experiment, George would of course not use his true body for the experiment. Instead, he would create a multiple shadow clone and stand in the middle of the magic circle. After George checked again that there was no problem with the magic circle, he pulled all the clouds formed by the energy accumulated for nearly a year above his head and transported them into the magic circle, and then used his spiritual connection to the first world of the deer and the cauldron that he had extracted before. The moment his mental power connected with the star, the magic circle lit up with dazzling white light. George's mental power was quickly consumed in an instant, just when George thought he would be unable to detect it and the experiment would fail. The spiritual connection was naturally interrupted, and the clone in the center of the magic circle disappeared together with the dazzling white light. Thanks to book friends Kylan is not a demon, book friend Qingxian /me, book friend THOR1999, book friend I drifted over to pull it, and book friend 202003121533202242 for their recommendation votes. I also thank all book friends for their collections. Thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 83, Chapter 82, The First World. Chapter 83, Number 82nd World. George looked at the empty magic circle and thought it must have been a success, but it still needs to be verified next. Sitting cross-legged next to the magic circle, he began to meditate to restore the mental energy he had just consumed. Half an hour later, his mental strength was completely restored. George once again used his mental power to explore the stars in the world of the deer and the cauldron. As soon as George's mental power touched the stars, there was a familiar attraction somewhere that should be his clone. George followed the attraction and put his mind into the clone. Opening his eyes, George found himself in a woods. It worked, and George couldn't help but laugh. Different from the main world, George could clearly feel an invisible energy shield surrounding himself. Under George's perception, the energy shield was slowly dissipating. After George's calculations, the energy shield should be able to support more than 200 days. In other words, the energy accumulated by the chaos bead for one day can allow him to stay in this world for one day. Is it 1:1? It's still a simple transaction method. There are still some things that need to be tested in the next step, so first we need to find a city. Half an hour later, George, who had cast the illusion body spell, was walking leisurely in a lively city. Half a year later, in a courtyard house in the capital, George was lying on a rocking chair, holding an ancient book in his right hand and reading leisurely. There was a pretty maid next to her, holding a fan and fanning it gently. "Sir, another calligraphy and painting has been sent from Jubeo Pavilion, and it is said to be an authentic work by Tang Yin." This man with the look of a butler with clear braids walked lightly to George and said, "Tang Yin, you won't fool me with fake ones again." George said without raising his head. "How dare they? Who doesn't know now that our master has a magical eye?" the housekeeper said flatteringly. "Haha, it's just flattery from outsiders." That night, George did not go to listen to ditties on the flower boat on the Beijing Canal as usual, but came to his storage warehouse. Yes, as a serious person, how can we not feel the ancient humanities? And these are the most convenient places to get information. So, it would make sense to go and listen to a little tune, wouldn't it? Since half a year ago, I used my clone to successfully travel to the world of the deer and the cauldron. Using George's methods, he quickly collected a large amount of wealth. Then he came to the capital and bought this villa. Then besides listening to ditties, George spent a lot of money on collecting calligraphy, painting, and antiques. After all, this world is just a place for George to experiment. After George's experiment, the time of this world is unified with that of the main world. In other words, George spent half a year in this world, and half a year passed in the real world. Feeling that the energy shield around his body was already very indifferent, George estimated that the energy shield would disappear in a month at most. He took out a palm-sized cloth bag that had been casted with the invisible stretching spell and put everything in the warehouse into the pocket. Next, let's take a good look at the world. A month later, George disappeared from this world. George, who was standing next to the magic circle, looked at the clone that appeared in the magic circle again after more than 200 days. After undoing the clone, memories are poured in. Since George's body invests his consciousness into his clone every day, everything is as if he is experiencing it personally. Picking up the bag from the ground, George reappeared in the room of requirement from the chaotic space. The energy in the space has been exhausted. If you want to enter the world again, you need to accumulate energy again, and all this takes time. The antiques brought back from the world of the deer and the cauldron are placed one by one in the original showroom on the 4th floor. This showroom has long been cast by George with the invisible stretch spell, and there are too many items that can be stored in it. You can also take some back and put them in the art museum built next to the campus. Increasing the collection always makes people feel happy, right? The next day, after breakfast, Fred came to me and said, "Sir, you need to attend the government party tonight in person." "Okay, remember to remind me when the time comes." George smiled and replied. That night, George stepped out of the car with this month's Playboy girl on his arm. Reporters all around immediately swarmed. George walked elegantly into the banquet hall under the protection of security personnel. If the most famous person in the United States right now is undoubtedly George. His talent, style, and wealth are all the focus of attention. "Father, is he the Count?" a handsome teenage boy asked his father. "Yes, Howard, he is the Earl. The most genius Earl." Stark replied, "Let's go, I will take you to say hello. Our company still needs to cooperate with them." "Hey, boss, you finally came out of your castle," Paul said when he saw George walking in with his female companion. "Haha, it's not like you are outside." George and Paul hugged and said. In the past few years, Paul has been taking care of things in the head office for George, so George can stay on Hogwarts Island and do his own things so easily. "The film and television company is already urging me when to give them the script you mentioned last time. And this year's Oscar ceremony, you, the union president, will also attend," Paul said. "Well, they will arrange a lot of things for me every time we meet. I will watch the award ceremony then. As for the script, I will have someone send it to them tomorrow." Under the eager eyes of the girl next to him, George continued, Okay, madam. I will arrange for you to audition for the heroine in the drama Spring and Autumn in Troubled Times, and the rest will depend on whether your acting skills can impress the director." "Really? Thank you so much, Lord Earl." The girl next to her excitedly left a lip mark on George's face, and then wiped it off carefully. "You know, this gentleman's film and television company is notoriously strict. But every film is a masterpiece. It is my dream to have such an opportunity to be a heroine." At this moment, a middle-aged man came forward with a young man of 13 or 14 years old. He said, "Mr. Paul, it's a pleasure to see you here." Then he looked at George standing next to him and said, "Is this gentleman Mr. Orwell?" "My lord, it is an honor to meet you." "Oh, this is Mr. Stark, hello." Paul greeted and then introduced to George, "Boss, this Mr. Stark has some business relationships with the firearms company." "Is your last name Stark?" George asked. "Yes, Lord Earl." Stark replied. "Haha, you should call me George, or Orwell. The knighthood is not popular in the United States." George said, "Is this your son? What's his name?" "Howard, Howard Stark, sir," Howard replied. "Yes, Howard. I remember you, you will be a good young man," George said. After a few more pleasantries, Stark took Howard and left. George was able to chat with them for so long, which was a great honor. Naturally, he had to be sensible and leave as soon as possible. After seeing the father and son leave, George said to Paul, "Paul, Howard is a good guy. Pay more attention to him in the future." "Okay, boss." Paul didn't ask any more questions. He just wanted to invest more in whom his boss was optimistic about in the future. At this time, a person in a wheelchair was pushed in by his entourage, and everyone's eyes immediately focused there. Thanks to book friend THOR1999, book friend Kylan is not a demon, book friend 202107061440269996, book friend 202003121533202242, 4 book friends for their recommendation votes. Thank you also to everyone who has collected and commented on this book, thank you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 84 Roosevelt. Chapter 84 Roosevelt. George was invited to attend today's dinner, mostly for the sake of the man in the wheelchair. Roosevelt, who was sitting in a wheelchair, also looked at George. On the balcony of the banquet hall. "Good evening, Mr. Franklin Roosevelt." Because he had been sitting in a wheelchair all year round, Roosevelt's face looked paler than ordinary people. He looked at the young man sitting opposite, but he did not dare to look down upon him. He also smiled and responded, "Good evening, Mr. George Orwell." Roosevelt is now running for the position of governor of New York State as a Democratic Party, but in fact he himself has a deep relationship with the Republican Party. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the Republican Party, was his wife's cousin. Even when Roosevelt planned to enter politics as a Democrat, President Roosevelt, a Republican, angrily scolded him, "You despicable bastard! You traitor!" Of course, even this did not dissuade him from participating in politics. With Mrs. Roosevelt's understanding and support, Roosevelt returned to politics. He ran for governor in 1928 and narrowly lost, and was re-elected governor in 1930. New York can be said to be Roosevelt's experimental place to cultivate his ability to conduct political activities and manage national affairs. Before and after the election, campaign funds were indispensable, and George was the largest donor after Roosevelt's death. What confused Roosevelt was that he and other donors were pursuing policy preferences and other means to obtain benefits, while George did not make any interest demands in this regard. "I just met this person who has given me great support in terms of money and public opinion for the first time today." According to the information he received, this young Mr. George Orwell Swent has made extraordinary achievements in various fields in the United States so far. In terms of capital alone, it is already as good as some big families with 100 years of history. Mr. Orwell, it is an honor to meet you and thank you for your support over the past 2 years. Roosevelt said. "This is nothing to me," George responded with a smile. "No, I think as the largest funder of my campaign, you have the right to put forward your own political leanings and demands," Roosevelt said. "The presidential election will be held next year, right? And as far as I know, Mr. Roosevelt's nomination within the Democratic Party is not going smoothly." George suddenly changed the subject and said. Regarding George's sudden change of subject, Roosevelt did not expect it. However, there was no cover-up for the question raised by George. "Yes, sir, this is not a secret," Roosevelt said. "In fact, not only the party is not optimistic about me, but even the media does not think that I can win this nomination. Some media think that my nomination, the campaign, will only bring chaos and trouble to the Democratic Party. Of course, this does not include Mr. New York Times. They have always given me great support. Perhaps you can start with Amendment No. 18. George suggested. In fact, the impact of prohibition on American society far exceeds the original intention of the bill. Perhaps the original purpose of promulgating prohibition was to solve public health problems such as alcoholism, domestic violence, fights, and crime. However, during the entire 13 years of the implementation of prohibition, the bill not only failed to do this, but changed the face of society forever, and this impact has not been eliminated to this day. Although George was a huge beneficiary of prohibition. George's winery in California produces millions of liters of wine every year. These drinks are then distributed throughout the United States through the High Table Council, bringing hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue to George every year. But George also understands that some things cannot be stopped, so it is better to make good use of them. Because of the existence of too much counterfeit alcohol, more than thousands of victims have become disabled, and most of these disabilities are irreversible, George explained. Some of the more common medical remedies during the Great Depression contained relatively high alcohol content and were bought by ordinary people as drinks. Some small workshops are good at buying this kind of folk medicine, adding it with industrial plasticizer, and then selling it to ordinary people. Then, a large number of victims appeared. I believe that the vast majority of the people will support your approach. Roosevelt certainly understood that a large number of people opposed this bill, but there were also many people who supported it. It's not easy to choose campaign policy. It's a matter of stance. After George put forward his opinion, he stopped urging. Because George knew that he would definitely adopt his opinion, because this was Roosevelt's campaign policy in the previous life, and he just stated it in advance. The morning sun shone on the end of the bed in George's bedroom, and a pair of long, white feet retracted into the quilt. George stood up and opened the window, without any trace of fatigue after morning exercise on his face. "Honey, I think I need a little more rest today. Last night's female companion was so tired that she didn't want to move on the bed. It's okay, you can sleep a little longer. After saying that, he walked out of the bedroom. This is a villa in New York. George would never bring back to Hogwarts a female companion whose name he couldn't remember. After returning to Hogwarts, George dialed Vito Corleone's number. "Sir, what are your orders?" Vito said respectfully on the other end of the phone. "What happened to the tobacco agent we talked about earlier?" George asked. "All taken, sir," Vito replied. "Then go and get the liquor agent, just like the tobacco agent. You will get 1 point for the more than 20 of you, and each agent will have some." George said. "Sir, are you talking about a regular agent?" Vito asked. "Of course it is a regular agent. Remember to bring a lawyer. The agency contract can be signed for a longer time. The country is still in the period of alcohol prohibition, so the agency contract should be easy to win." "Understood, sir." After George integrated the entire underground council to form the High Table, in addition to the wine business, George also let these more than 20 families run some legal businesses on the surface. Even in the alcohol business, after the lifting of the alcohol ban, the goods will be sold through legitimate channels. After all, the U.S. tax department will be really powerful in the future. By February 1933, too, Valentine's Day was also the eve of Roosevelt's inauguration. The entire U.S. bank began to collapse. Trust companies in various states were at the end of their rope. Banks collapsed in batches. At this time, the U.S. banks had less than 14 billion gold in stock, but they had to cope with it. With deposits of around 60 billion, banks were crowded with people, and bank runs spread across the country. But this does not include George's Wells Fargo Bank. Not to mention that George's strong capital base is not afraid of runs. Moreover, George had already taken corresponding measures before this, so he did not suffer any losses in this wave of bank failures. George was probably the only banker who was not reviled during this period. Under the hype of the media, George and his Wells Fargo Bank once again made the headlines of newspapers across the United States. Now all people in the United States know that deposits at Wells Fargo are the safest. George also worked through the Morgan and Rockefeller families to get his foot in the door of the Federal Reserve. After all, George now has too much cash at his disposal. Under normal circumstances, for reasonable tax avoidance, they are placed on the Arabian Peninsula. Now that George is willing to put up cash, the companies behind the Federal Reserve are eager for George to come out and take over. On March 1933, in front of Capitol Hill, Roosevelt solemnly took the oath. "I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, solemnly swear." Roosevelt inherited a nation in tatters from Hoover. Thanks to book friends Kylan is not a demon, book friend THOR1999, book friend Chingxian \me, book friend 202003121533202242, and several book friends for their recommendation votes. Thank you all. If you think it is still eye-catching, please like and save it. End of this chapter. Chapter 85 Undercurrent. Chapter 85 Undercurrent. By the end of 1933, the effects of the Great Depression finally showed signs of improvement thanks to the efforts of many parties. After paying a large sum of gold, George also occupied a seat in the Federal Reserve. So far, George can be said to have finally stood among those the century-old family is on the same level. Coupled with the support from Roosevelt, George could finally settle the debt of the year. The cause of the incident and the families involved have been investigated by George. Under legilimency, no secret can be hidden from George. "Little Fred, have everything been arranged over there?" George asked, putting down the teacup in his hand. "Yes, sir. The plan has already begun. Tomorrow's newspapers will publish the shady dealings of the Delaware congressman, and there will be continuous reports that will eventually implicate the DuPont family." Young Fred, the son of the butler Fred Sr. Red, now began to slowly replace his father and assume the position of family steward. Little Fred looked at George, who was silent in front of him, and continued, "I have made preparations in other aspects and will not leave any chance to their family." "Well, okay, then it's up to you." George nodded noncommittally. The next day, a piece of news titled "The Biggest Scandal in the Founding of the People's Republic of China" appeared on the headlines of major newspapers and TV media. The news detailed some of the family's shady stories, including manipulating the Delaware State Assembly to promote a tax cut bill that was beneficial to DuPont. At this critical point in the Great Depression, this news directly detonated the entire United States. The report not only gave a list of the manipulated congressmen, but also detailed evidence such as the amount of bribes received by the congressmen. Things began to get worse and worse. 1934, June 10. Rockefeller Jr., who had not had direct contact with George for a long time, called George personally. The two chatted on the phone for a long time. In the end, the DuPont family gave up all patents and their shares in General Motors were purchased directly by George at a low price. Under George's instruction, the DuPont family's laboratory personnel were also hired into George's joint laboratory with high salaries. The DuPont family handed over the 3 family members who were involved in the incident, and the incident ended. Is it actually possible? George knew very well that when cutting the grass, you must get rid of the roots. It's just that some things need to be done slowly. Sure enough, the strong years of the DuPont family either died in accidents or actively went to war in the next 10 years. What outsiders don't know is that even some illegitimate children who can be concealed have not escaped bad luck. Of course, this is all for later, let's not mention it for now. After George negotiated the terms with the middleman, this matter was no longer worthy of George's attention. Adolf Hitler, who served as Chancellor of Germany, raised the butcher knife in his hand and began to take complete control of the country and troops. Using Hydra as a symbol, John Schmidt raised a banner to the outside world and recruited Dr. Arnim Zola to begin research on soldier exoskeleton auxiliary armor and other new weapons and equipment. And Schmidt, who was as obsessed with myths as Hitler, continued to collect legends. Moreover, Dr. Erkins's research on developing human potential has also reached a critical moment. At this time, Howard Stark, who was only 17 years old, began to show his prominence and took a big chunk from George's abandonment of the DuPont family's arms business. Stark became an important arms supplier to the military. Hogwarts Island. The area of the island has now increased again. After George returned from Comitage, he arranged some magic circles he learned from the library around the island. From the outside, the entire island doesn't look much changed. In fact, the area inside is as big as the original 3. Moreover, George also had rows of rooms built at the location of Hagrid's hut. The houses were prepared for an expanded security presence. The original security company is now the largest security company in the United States. We have established cooperative relationships with many police stations, companies, and banks. All security personnel are divided into 3 parts as George envisioned. And in the past 2 years, George and others have begun to slowly transfer security personnel with special abilities back to Hogwarts Island. After all, even for ordinary team members, with powerful firepower, equipment, and trained security personnel, each one is as powerful as the Special Forces soldiers of later generations. After years of development, George now has a total of 500 special security personnel, not including the 300 people equipped for the high table of the underground parliament. Since the Great Depression, George has intentionally recruited some 1,000 orphan teenagers from society. In addition to training in firearms combat, people are also arranged to teach various special operations knowledge. After suggestions from Ryan and others, George named this group of special security guards the Dragon Corps. Because it is appropriate for these white-skinned people to use the evil dragon of the West as their name. These orphans will be trained as the next generation and are called Dragon Cubs. On November 11, after 2 years of accumulating energy, George finally decided on the world he wanted to enter this time. In fact, there were not many choices for George. Considering that the war was approaching, George must make some preparations. Since the last time he traveled was his first time, his energy was limited, so after accumulating energy for 2 years this time, George wanted to do a few more experiments to figure out the mechanism of time travel. With these 2 points in mind, George chose the world of Suicide Squad. This world can bring many benefits to George, and the easiest thing to obtain is knowledge. Whether it's firearms, aircraft, tanks, or people's livelihood technology. These are very effective for George. Therefore, after George appeared in this small world, the first thing to deal with was the issue of identity. However, this problem is also very easy to solve. George directly found a criminal den. I chose a face that seemed passable in all aspects. Then, the rest will be simple. George would begin life as this man in the world. In that den, after solving the problem of initial funds and finding a new place for himself, George started his own plan. After solving the problem of identity, the next problem is money. After all, there is no problem in the United States that money cannot solve. If it cannot be solved, it can only be said that you have not spent enough money. I have not seen that as long as the money is available, the president can do anything. Okay, back to the point. George's way of getting money was very simple. He flew directly to the address he got from the boss of the den, which was the address of the largest gang in the local area. Under the influence of the spell, no one could detect George's entry. Then take out the stolen money from the gang and leave directly. No one noticed the whole process, and George was not interested in getting rid of these people after taking the money. That will only draw attention to yourself. Over the next month, George began using magic to copy various books from the library. This matter is best solved. George first opens the mirror space, thus blocking the cameras in the library. Then use the duplicate in Harry Potter to turn all the books into 2 copies, and put the copied books into the magic bag prepared in advance. Unfortunately, the person who came in was George's clone. If it were the original body, it could also use the multiple shadow clone technique. It is estimated that all these books could be copied in one night. A month later, looking at the magic bag in his hand, George disappeared from the sky and reappeared on the magic circle in the newly rented apartment. He took out a pair of small birds from the magic bag and looked at the already stiff birds, which proved that it was temporarily impossible to cross with a living creature. Why is it said to be temporary? Because the clone entered. If the main body entered and could use the space, the effect may be different. This needs to be verified again in the future. Then, George felt the remaining energy above his head again. Simply put, if it takes 1 energy point to stay in the small world for a day, 10 energy points will be consumed to travel through it. If George wants to stay in the small world for 30 days, he needs to inject 40 points of energy into the magic circle. After the energy of the energy shield is consumed, it will be expelled from the small world. Now, the chaos bead's energy accumulated for 1 day is an energy point. We can try to find other ways in the future. In terms of time, it is still very inconvenient. After all, in some worlds, the plot time span is relatively large. On this point, although George already has an idea for the time being, time has not come yet, so he can only do this first. Thanks to Book Friends THOR1999 and Book Friend 202107061440269996, 2 Book Friends for their recommendation votes. Thanks. I would also like to thank several book friends for their collection and comments. Thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 86, Chapter 85, Batman. Chapter 86, Number 85, Batman. Moreover, when George's clone entered the small world, the chaos bead was still absorbing the energy in the space, so if no new items were extracted, the energy consumption would be within George's acceptable range. After George took back his clone, he reappeared in the study. George took the magic bag containing nearly 10,000 books and came to the library on the 5th floor. There were originally tens of thousands of magic books collected here, but they were all placed in the forbidden book area by George. The empty space has been filled by George with ordinary books. But this didn't bother George. He used magic to expand the library again, used transfiguration to create rows of bookshelves, and then put the books into categories. With George's current magical attainments, it is possible to change such ordinary daily necessities to the point of permanent deformation. After playing with some kids on the lawn for an afternoon, we enjoyed a sumptuous Chinese meal. After spending a month in the library, George also needed a break. The next day, George went to the head office again and signed several plans. I also selected some more advanced knowledge from the books I brought back this time, made it into documents, and gave them to the researchers below. Promote the speed of research and development in the laboratory. The next day, after feeling rested, George returned to the world of Suicide Squad again. In addition to the random location where he entered the small world for the first time, George discovered that the location where he appeared the second time was the place he left last time. After returning to the apartment, George first bought a new computer, connected it to the internet cable, and began to collect some information online. The first is the news about Midway City. On the web page, there are just some ordinary news and no big explosions. In other words, the plot may not have begun yet. George had only heard of the movie Suicide Squad in his previous life, but had never seen it, so he only knew a rough plot. The main story is that after the death of Superman, the United States fell into a crime outbreak, and the US government discovered that there were various hidden dangers in national security issues. Amanda Waller, the leader of a secret government agency called Argus, decided to recruit imprisoned superhuman villains and exchange their freedom for them to help protect the security of the United States. Amanda Waller first found an archaeologist named Joan Munn, whose body was possessed by an ancient soul called a witch. Later, the enchantress escaped from Amanda Waller's control and attempted to free her evil brother, build a weapon that could turn ordinary people into a superpowered army, and use it to rule the earth. In order to stop her, Amanda Waller formed Task Force. The story follows a former Los Angeles gang member's revenge against the devil, a reptile creature living in the sewers called Killer Croc, and others who use nanobombs to control everyone and fight against a witch brother and sister. Yes, this is DC time, but the time should be after Superman died fighting Doomsday, that is, in 2016. The location is not in Gotham City, but in Midway City. And some of the information George got from the library last time was just basic knowledge. Really cutting-edge technology cannot be found in libraries. Therefore, if you want more high-tech knowledge, or even get a satellite, you can only think of a way. Fortunately, after recalling the general background of this world, George also brought something from the Marvel world. George believed that with this thing, he should be able to get what he needs. The next day, George used the stolen ID to buy a bus ticket to Gotham City. After a 10-hour journey, George finally arrived in this crime city. After coming out of the station, George took a taxi directly to Wayne Tower. Yes, if he wants to get the technology he wants as quickly as possible, George will certainly not follow the plot. After all, this is a real world with a complete world background. Otherwise, George would not have been able to take the 10-hour drive to Gotham City. In this case, from a businessman's perspective, the fastest way to achieve the goal must be exchange. And in the DC world, is there anyone richer than Mr. Wayne? Therefore, George's chosen trading target was Mr. Wayne. Although George knew that with Mr. Wayne's suspicious character, the transaction would not go smoothly, but now George's strength is not simple. Arriving at Wayne Tower, I changed into a decent suit in the cafe on the corner. Then, I went directly to the front desk of the company. "Hello, beauty. Is Mr. Bruce here?" George smiled at the front desk lady and said. "Hello, do you have an appointment?" the receptionist replied politely. "That is to say, he is here, right? Haha, thank you very much." After saying that, George ignored the surprised look at the front desk and turned around to leave. In fact, George didn't think he could meet Mr. Wayne through the front desk. He is also the boss of the company, so he naturally knows that the front desk can only contact the secretary. George's means of controlling people wasn't even over the phone line. So, it's okay for George to know that Bruce Wayne is in the company. After all, it might not be polite to go directly to your home. Although, the method George used next was not polite. After coming out of Wayne Tower, he placed a disguise charm on himself in the blind spot of the surveillance camera, then unfolded his ancient wings and flew directly to the top of Wayne Tower. After walking around the top floor, George saw Mr. Bruce in the largest office. He was lowering his head to sign some document. George disapparated and appeared on the sofa opposite. Bruce Wayne's alertness is still very high. As soon as George appeared, he looked at George. Should I say he is worthy of being Batman? He is really alert, George said playfully. Even when faced with the man who suddenly appeared in front of him, Bruce did not panic. After all, he has fought with alien monsters and is also a well-informed person. At this time, Bruce was also sizing up the man who suddenly appeared opposite him. In Bruce's ears, the artificial intelligence had already searched for the man in front of him. 10 seconds later, the search results were reported to Bruce. Bruce frowned when he heard the artificial intelligence report in his ears. Only at the end, when the artificial intelligence asked whether to take safety measures, Bruce said no. Because he knew that the man who appeared in front of him was not the one he found. And the other party doesn't want to appear disadvantageous to him. Otherwise it wouldn't have come that far. Mr. Peter, let's call you that for now. Excuse me, what's the reason for your sudden appearance in my office? Bruce asked calmly. George also admired Batman very much. From the time he appeared to the present, the other party did not make any unnecessary actions except for investigating himself through artificial intelligence. Acting very calm. After all, with George's current hearing, it is too easy to hear the voice in the other person's ear. Okay, Mr. Bruce, let's have a frank talk. After saying that, George changed back to his own appearance. After all, meeting Bruce in this identity would not gain the other party's trust at all. To get acquainted again, you can call me George Orwell Swenter. George stood up and performed an elegant aristocratic etiquette and said, by the way, you can tell your artificial intelligence not to check me. Arrived. Oh, then why? Bruce said from the opposite side. Now that he found out that George had no intention of doing anything to him, Bruce was also willing to get more information. Mr. Bruce, I am here to do the transaction sincerely, so can we just talk about the transaction? George said after sitting down. Thanks to book friend THOR1999, book friend Kylan is not a demon, book friend Chingxian /me, book friend 201612301313176675, book friend HUANG07536544, book friend smokes and misses his wife. Thank you all book friends for your recommendation votes. I would also like to thank the book friends who have collected this book, thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 87 Trading. Chapter 87 Trading. Trade? I'm not in the habit of trading with strangers. Bruce said with a chuckle. Haha, do you refuse? Don't you even want to know the contents of the transaction? George said with an indifferent expression. At least let me know where you're from, Bruce said. Well, it's not impossible, it's just that you don't know it, so it doesn't make any sense. George said, the magical world is where I come from. It is a small pocket space that exists at the latitude of the Earth. Then why did you find me? Bruce then asked. Deal, I said it at the beginning. In fact, the war that happened on the Earth some time ago shocked the magic world. After coming out, I found that the Earth was developing too fast. After investigation, I chose you as a transaction object. After all, I think you may need what I have in my hand the most. Nice story, sir. Don't you believe in the existence of magic? You can understand it. George finally knew how serious it was to meet a patient with terminal hypochondriasis. After speaking, George said directly, transfiguration, and a green light shot from George's hand to a pen on the desk. Bruce was also startled by the sudden green light. Just when he was about to make a move, he realized that the target of the green light was not him, and stopped immediately. Looking at the pen that was hit by the green light, Bruce turned into a Batman model about 10 centimeters tall. Bruce reached out and picked up the model and found that it was made of metal and very vivid. Wonder Woman and Miss Diana already exist, so magic shouldn't be an unacceptable existence. George shrugged his shoulders and said. Okay, now can you tell me what deal you want to make with me? Bruce said. An artificial intelligence that belongs to me, and then some high-tech materials. I don't need those black technologies of yours. George said. Oh, are magicians also starting to be interested in technology? Bruce said. Magic and technology are just different ways of studying the law. There is an old saying that a stone from another mountain can be used to attack jade. We study magic, but we will not underestimate the power of technology. Then what do you give in exchange? After Bruce asked this question, George began to believe that Bruce had plans to trade. Let you become younger and let your body surpass the peak of the human body. I think this is what you need most. George said seriously. Batman is also a human-like being in the DC world, comparable to a god. He is a superhero without superpowers. Relying on his extraordinary talent, he spent decades traveling around the world, visiting top or legendary fighting masters in the East and West, learning fighting techniques from various schools, and using his strong financial resources to manufacture various high-tech equipment. After rigorous physical training, a customized diet and biofeedback training, Bruce represents the highest level of normal human physical fitness. His physical level of strength, speed, endurance, reaction speed, and flexibility all surpassed those of the Olympic champions of the same period. To stay in tip-top shape, he never drank alcohol, he secretly substituted ginger juice for champagne at social events. But even if he has this, it is only a mortal body. Batman ultimately relies on tactics and black technology equipment. And as he grows older, he gradually loses his ability, and the armor begins to be mainly powered by exoskeleton armor. I can let you have this power first and then exchange it with me. So, Bruce, how about a deal? George looked directly at Bruce and said. Honestly, I can't believe you. But I mean no harm, don't I? George said this while standing behind Bruce and putting his hands on Bruce's shoulders. The moment George put his hands on Bruce, Bruce had already reacted. Bruce, who has learned various fighting techniques around the world, is also one of the world's top fighting masters. But no matter how hard Bruce Wu tried, he was suppressed by those hands and couldn't move. Bruce understood that this was showing the other party's strength, and that the other party really had no intention of killing him. Otherwise he would not have been able to react if a knife had just appeared on his neck. After George saw that Bruce was no longer resisting, he appeared on the sofa again. How do you think about it? George asked. Okay, come with me. After saying that, Bruce stood up and walked outside. The two came out of Bruce's office. The secretary outside the door quickly stood up and said, Mr. Bruce. Well, I'll go out for a while. Bruce nodded. Then the secretary looked at George walking behind and was stunned. When did this man go in? George also smiled at the beautiful secretary as a greeting. Bruce knows how to be a boss. Although he knows that Bruce's playboy image is all disguise, it does not prevent George from teasing Bruce about this matter. The two get into Bruce's supercar, which then drives out of Wayne Tower. This car is good. Give me one later. George said while looking at the supercar. No problem, I have another one in the garage. You can just turn around and drive away. But can magicians also drive? Bruce said. It's been a few days since I've been out, and I decided that driving is still fun, isn't it? As long as you like it, do you need me to arrange a place for you? No need, I have other things to do. A few days ago I felt an explosion of dark magic in Midway City, and I need to investigate. Dark magic, what is that? Magic power is neither good nor bad. It depends on the person who uses it. But compared with ordinary magic power, long-term exposure to dark magic power can easily make people crazy. Therefore, we need to take a look at the source of that dark magic power. George didn't mind. Create more personas for yourself. There's no harm in tempting Batman astray. George knew that Bruce only believed in him temporarily. Looking back, I will definitely develop a strategy for myself, and maybe develop a set of anti-mage armor. The two soon arrived at Wayne Manor and entered an elevator from the side door of the garage. The two of them came directly to a large underground space. This should be the new Batcave. Arriving at an experimental platform, Bruce said, "What do I need to do next?" "To be honest, I thought that after I entered here, you would launch some mechanisms to try to subdue me," George said with a smile. "Is that useful?" "You can try." "Okay, what do you need me to do?" In fact, after entering here, Bruce also had this idea, but considering the sincerity and strength that George had always shown, Bruce gave up the idea. "Just remember to inform your butler to prepare more things." After George said that, he took out a square box from the bag he carried with him, and a heart-shaped grass was stored in the box. This heart-shaped grass was one that George brought out from Wakanda many years ago. The other two were used by George and Ryan respectively. "Is it okay to just eat it?" Bruce asked. "It's best when squeezed into juice," George returned. After seeing that George didn't seem to be joking, Bruce took out a thicker test tube, mashed it into purple juice, laid it on the experimental table, and drank it in one gulp. George saw Bruce, who was unconscious, and knew that the heart-shaped grass had taken effect. After looking at the empty laboratory, he didn't move around. Instead, he sat down cross-legged, with the light of magic flashing between his hands. An hour later, Bruce sat up on the experimental table and breathed hard. "What, did you see anyone?" George asked. George knew that after using the heart-shaped grass, he would have hallucinations. "It should be said that I will meet some people in the consciousness space." But George did not experience this feeling with the chaos bead in his consciousness space. And Ryan, well, I forgot to ask at the time. "No," Bruce replied, looking at George. "Haha, as long as you're happy." He knew that Bruce wouldn't tell him, and he was just asking casually. Feeling empty in his stomach, Bruce took out chocolate and other high-calorie foods from a nearby refrigerator and prepared to eat. "Isn't there a big dinner?" George asked at this time. "Do you need it? I can have it delivered." Bruce thought George was hungry, so he said, "Okay, let me treat you to a meal." After saying that, he took out a dozen Chinese delicacies from the bag. Handing Bruce a pair of chopsticks, "Try it, it's absolutely authentic." After giving George a strange look, Bruce picked up the chopsticks, and the two of them started eating without saying anything. Thanks to book friend Singchen0724, book friend Yin.Singchen, book friend THOR1999, book friend Kylan is not a demon, several book friends for their recommendation votes, thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 88 Artificial Intelligence. Chapter 88 Artificial Intelligence. The two men swept away the feast on the experimental table like a whirlwind. "Don't look at me like this, I like women and I'm not interested in you," George said in response to Bruce's strange eyes. "I also like women, okay? Are all magicians so edible?" Bruce asked angrily. "You don't think that the food given to you is the only one, do you? That is to say..." Bruce was about to say something. "Don't think about it, I won't fight with you. I am a mage and I have no interest in doing anything. If you have this time, you should test the growth of your strength," George said. Bruce didn't force it, but walked to another room, drew a tube of blood for himself, and put it into a nearby instrument. Then walked to the exercise equipment on the other side of the adjacent room. Half an hour later, a slightly dull voice sounded. "Master, according to the comprehensive evaluation, your physical fitness is 3 times that of ordinary humans. After scanning, the old injuries in your body have been completely healed. Compared with the super soldier serum in the Marvel world that can increase a person's physical fitness to 5 times the peak of the human body, Wakanda's heart-shaped grass is much inferior, and it is more inclined to strengthen agility. This can be seen in the battle between Black Panther and Captain America during Heroes Civil War. How's it going? Are you satisfied?" George said. "Very good. Thank you." Bruce shook hands and said, "Then please wait a moment." After speaking, he led George to a computer room. After sitting down in front of the computer, he took out a mobile hard drive from the drawer on the side. After plugging in the computer startup file, I started typing on the computer keyboard. This is the artificial intelligence prepared for you. Now I will change its underlying algorithm and set you as the first authority. If you have any other requests, you can put them forward now. Bruce said without looking back. Just add that the highest mission is the order of George Orwell's Winter. George replied. Okay, wait a minute. A few more verifications are needed. Do you need to give it a name? Well, let's call it Monday. 10 minutes later, after verifying the pupils and voice, Bruce handed a tablet computer with artificial intelligence installed to George. Okay, now this tablet can only exert 1/10,000th of the power of the artificial intelligence program. To achieve maximum power, a large computer room is needed. If you need it, I can help you prepare it. Bruce said. Very good, Bruce, I'll bother you then. George said directly without being polite. Give me an address and it will be delivered tomorrow, including installation. Bruce said. That's no need. Just ask them to deliver the things to your manor. I'll pick them up tomorrow. George seemed to have seen through something and looked at Bruce with a smile. Okay, I have entered all the information you need into the tablet, and the transaction is completed. Of course, the deal is done. See you tomorrow, Bruce. Oh, by the way, I'll drive away in a moment. Haha, actually I like your Batmobile better. But forget it, that one belongs to Batman. After that, George directly disapparated and appeared in the garage. After waving to the camera in the corner, George got into the Mercedes-AMG Vision Gran Turismo. Bruce watched the Mercedes speeding out of the manor on the surveillance camera in the basement, and then said to the air, locate Monday and record all access addresses. Then, retrieve all the videos where Mr. Magician appears and set up a folder Magician. Conduct the most detailed DNA test on the chopsticks on the experimental table. Okay, sir, the folder has been created. George was unaware of Bruce's behavior. But even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Just as George knew, Bruce would definitely install some small programs in his artificial intelligence, but George was not worried. After all, the artificial intelligence was what George planned to bring back to the Marvel world for use. At that time, the little tricks Bruce left behind were naturally useless. After leaving Bruce Manor, George said to the tablet, on Monday, start collecting all the technology. I'm very sorry, sir. The memory is too small and there is insufficient storage space. A mechanical voice sounded. Okay, position it as a high-end hotel. George said. The Wayne Hotel has been positioned, the route has been planned, and the onboard computer has been connected. Ding, a blue line appears on the onboard computer display. Soon, George arrived at this high-end hotel. After checking in at the front desk, he asked the hotel to send him 2 pieces of the highest capacity memory. He used the computer provided in the hotel room to start downloading the knowledge of this world. Estimated time 48 hours. Okay, Monday, tag all the high-tech labs in the country. Show the locations. Okay, sir. The search will be completed in 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, nearly 100 high-tech laboratories were displayed on the tablet's display. Here George saw Wayne's laboratory and the cutting-edge laboratory where the Flash was located. Of course, George would not disturb these 2 laboratories for the time being, and then eliminated some laboratories that he did not like, and finally George selected more than 30 scientific research institutions. Including various disciplines and, of course, scattered around the world. The next day, what Bruce saw on the surveillance was a record of hooking up with a beautiful woman in the hotel bar and then taking the 2 beauties back to the room. In fact, George let the 2 beauties sleep after taking them back to the room. In the next whole night, I visited the computer rooms of more than 30 scientific research institutions through portals. With the ability to mirror space, no organization's defense methods can detect itself. Early the next morning, George, lying between the two beauties, was very satisfied with his actions last night. After the two girls woke up and had another sports match, George took a shower and left the hotel with satisfaction. After grabbing some food at a restaurant, George came to Wayne Manor again. In another basement of the manor, George saw equipment that could form a large machine room. Under Bruce's incredible eyes, he put all the equipment into the magic bag that had been casted with the seamless stretch spell. George also put away the Mercedes. Okay, Bruce. I'm very happy with the transaction with you. I won't interrupt you anymore, and we'll see you again if we have the chance. Then, George used apparition to reappear in the newly rented apartment in Midway City. Take out your tablet and continue downloading data. On Monday, invade the city's surveillance and notify me as soon as possible of any violent incidents. Okay, sir, but in this case it will still take 30 hours to download the data. It doesn't matter. Help me find the whereabouts of Joan Munn, an archaeologist. When you find it, let me know. While waiting, George naturally did not do anything, but opened the space door again. This time, George came to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, because here is another thing that George needs, that is, satellites. Artificial intelligence without satellites is not true artificial intelligence. After searching for some information at the Space Agency, I found a company responsible for building satellites for the Space Agency. In fact, there are satellites in the Space Agency, including the launched rockets, but it is too conspicuous, so of course George, who has better choices, will not take it directly from here. The next day, George returned to his apartment from a rocket base. At this time, his magic bag had already contained an entire space satellite. The technology in this world is relatively advanced. George only needs to send the satellite into space, and after contacting the artificial intelligence, it can automatically change the orbit. In fact, if you want to send satellites into space, you need to use rockets to send them, but the launch system is too large and impractical. Therefore, George finally only took a military satellite and a spacesuit. Just when George returned to the apartment, the tablet made a beeping message notification sound. Thanks to book friends Yin. Xing Chen, book friend Kylan is not a demon, and book friend THOR1999 for their recommendation votes. Thank you all book friends for your collection. End of this chapter. Chapter 89 The Witch. Chapter 89 The Witch. Monday, what's going on? Sir, the whereabouts of Professor Joan Munn were discovered through surveillance at Bellerive Sanatorium in Taylorborn Parish, Louisiana. According to official information, many terrorists are imprisoned there, and it is called a swamp by the underground world. Dark prison? I understand. How is the data download going? George asked. The data has been downloaded. Monday replied. Very good, standby mode. After saying that, George put the tablet into the magic bag. George, who had watched this movie in his previous life, knew that this time Joan Munn appeared in the Black Prison to accompany Amanda to select team members. It is this time that Deadshot, Harley Quinn, Tinder Man, and Killer Croc were all selected to join the Suicide Squad. In other words, the plot of Suicide Squad is about to begin. George doesn't pay attention to Joan Munn to help the Suicide Squad or the government stop the witch and her brother from killing innocent people. So what if they let their brother and sister go? The water in this world is very deep, and it's not George's turn to be a hero yet. George is interested in the magical knowledge possessed by witches. As for how to make the witch obediently hand over the knowledge she knew, George already had a plan. In order not to miss the critical moment, George first used the space door to get outside the black prison. Then open the mirror space and monitor everything outside from the space. Walking in the mirror space, George followed Amanda and began to select team members. The first one is Harley Quinn, then Killer Croc, Fireman, and finally Deadshot. To be honest, George had no idea why he chose Harley Quinn. But that's not George's focus. That night, George came to the Pittsfield Hotel with Professor Joan Munn, Amanda, and others. This place has long been used by the task force as a stronghold for house arrest of Professor Joan Moon. After several people returned to the room, George followed Amanda back to her room. As soon as he entered the room, George directly used the sleeping curse to make the female Nigo fall asleep. The suitcase she had been carrying also fell to the ground. George picked up the black suitcase on the floor and opened the suitcase using the silent chant, "Open the Idaho cave." A somewhat withered heart appeared in front of George's eyes, and there was a bomb next to the heart. George knew that this was how Amanda controlled the witch. Here we talk about the origin of witches. The witch and her brother came from another world thousands of years ago. After they came to the earth, they were worshipped as gods by the humans at that time. Later, because the two turned against humans, the souls of the witch and her brother were sealed in 2 stone statues. Later, archaeologist Professor Joan Munn accidentally broke into the cave that sealed the 2 people, and inadvertently opened the witch's seal and released the witch. The witch, who had long since lost her body, took over the body of Dr. Joan Moon. The source of the witch's power, that is, the heart, has not been destroyed over time and has become the only item that can control the witch. Later, Amanda led people to find it from the cave. Also found at the same time was another stone statue with the witch's brother sealed inside. This suitcase has a function, that is, as long as Dr. Joan Munn, who is possessed by the witch, comes close to the suitcase at a certain distance without Amanda's permission, the suitcase will automatically explode. Destroy the witch's heart, causing her to die completely. That's why the witch couldn't steal the suitcase quietly. Another reason why George followed Amanda to the room was that he found a stone statue placed there as a decoration on the desk. Putting the 2 things into the magic bag, George sat at the desk. Because George knew that tonight, the witch would come looking for this sealed stone statue. Sure enough, at about 10 o'clock, George felt a spatial fluctuation. Then the witch appeared in the room. The moment the witch appeared in the house, she looked at Amanda, who was lying on the ground, and then saw the black suitcase next to Amanda. The witch was very happy when she saw the suitcase. Just when she took 2 steps forward, the suitcase's settings may have sounded, and then it stopped again. However, she suddenly discovered that the suitcase did not seem to call the police. The witch instantly appeared next to the suitcase. The moment she opened the suitcase, while she was still excited about being free again, she saw the empty suitcase, and a smile froze on her face for a moment. After the witch rummaged through the suitcase, she was about to wake Amanda up and ask where the heart was, when a voice sounded in the room. "Are you looking for it?" The witch instantly looked towards the place where the sound came from, and a tall and handsome young man slowly emerged from the air. In fact, the suitcase the witch saw just now was an empty box conjured by George using the transformation spell, just to satisfy his own evil taste. At this time, George appeared on the other side of the room with the restored suitcase in his hand. Just when the witch was about to snatch it, the suitcase sounded an alarm. Now the witch knew that the young man who had just appeared was holding her own heart. "Who are you? Why are you holding that box?" asked the witch. "Haha, Miss Witch, instead of caring about who I am, you should care more about what I want to do." "Or what I want?" George said, picking up the suitcase in his hand. "Then what do you want?" "Your magical knowledge," George said. "Haha, another person who is greedy for power. Unfortunately, I won't make a deal with you," the witch replied. The moment the witch answered her question, George felt a spiritual force interfering with and corroding him. George knew that this was the witch trying to control herself with hallucinations. The witch's abilities can be summarized as follows: teleportation, transformation of subordinates, illusion control, memory reading, and the electromagnetic control of destroying satellites and aircraft carriers. However, among these methods, except for electromagnetic control, which is acceptable, George does not like other methods. George himself has several methods of teleportation and memory reading, so he can't use them. The illusion control is even worse. Even those with a slightly stronger mind can't control it. The transformed subordinates are not as powerful as they are ugly. Difference. That's why electromagnetic control is good. George then smiled and said, "You still want to interfere with me with your little mental energy, so forget it. And don't you want your brother's stone statue?" The moment she heard George's words, the witch knew she was in trouble. In fact, even if George wanted to trade the suitcase with the witch now, the witch would not trade. Unless George was willing to trade the heart inside with her, the witch wouldn't dare approach the suitcase. The reason why the witch was willing to talk to the mysterious man who appeared in front of her was to delay her time. As long as she finds the stone statue that sealed her brother, opens the stone statue and lets her brother occupy the young man in front of her like she occupied Joan Mun, then her wish will be fulfilled. But now, the young man in front of him seems to know himself very well and knows what he needs. No, it's not like that. It should be said that the young man in front of me must know him very well, otherwise he would not have come here in advance and told him what he had just done. "What do you want?" the witch asked bitterly. "Haha, I told you, I'm making a deal with you, why are you all so distrustful of people?" George said. "But our magic comes from the inheritance of blood. You can't learn it." As for what he said, although the witch heard everything he said, it had nothing to do with her, so she didn't care at all. Now she just wants to go back to the stone carving. "So there's no more talk," George said. "What I said is true. If our magic knowledge could be learned, I would have been asked by these people during the time I was controlled, wouldn't I?" The witch pointed at Amanda on the ground. "That has nothing to do with me. Since you have nothing to trade, goodbye ma'am." After saying that, George threw the suitcase at his feet. He also made a gesture to leave. "Wait a moment, sir." Witch George was about to take away the stone statue, but she became anxious and immediately stopped George. "Sir, you can't learn anything from us, but some of the knowledge we collected in this world thousands of years ago can be traded to you," the witch said. "Oh, what is that?" George asked with interest. Thank you to the book friends Yin. End of this chapter. Chapter 90. Chapter 90 The Return. "Power, a tyrannical power," the witch replied in a hoarse voice. "Leave it to me directly. If it satisfies me, I will give this to you." George raised the stone statue in his hand and said. Seeing the stone statue in George's hand, the witch looked expectantly. After taking another look at George, the witch flashed and a red crystal appeared in her hand. "They are all stored here. Please return the stone statue to me," the witch said in a slightly seductive voice. George looked at the spar thrown by the witch and did not catch it with his hands. Who knows what tricks a witch who has lived for thousands of years would use on things. After letting the crystal fall to the ground, George used transfiguration to create a moving villain. This was an advanced application of transfiguration. Then the villain scampered to the side of the crystal, picked up the crystal, and placed it in a small square box conjured by George. After the villain closed the lid of the box, George used the flying spell to directly put the box into the magic bag. Seeing that George did not pick up the crystal stone directly, the witch showed a disappointed expression, looked directly at George and said, "Can you give me the stone statue now?" "Don't worry, it's still early. Can you tell me why you were sealed?" George looked at the witch with a playful expression. "Do you want to regret it?" The witch's voice suddenly became louder. George's question reminded the witch of her tragic experience when she was sealed. In fact, the witch felt a sense of crisis in the young man opposite her all the time. This sense of crisis gradually increased as the two communicated. The witch still believed in her premonition. After all, this ability had saved her life many times. If it weren't for the desire to get the stone statue back, I might have teleported away the moment I felt the crisis. When the witch heard the other party asking about her being sealed, and faced the young man's deep eyes, her sense of crisis reached its peak. She quickly activated her teleportation ability to escape from that person and return to the original room. Then he instantly disappeared into Dr. Joan Mun's body. As long as his soul was hidden in Joan Mun's body, no one could harm him. In fact, the current body is still under the control of the native soul Joan Mun, and the witch cannot control this body. Whenever a witch wants to appear, she must do so only when Jungmun calls her. Of course, with the ability to hallucinate in the soul, the witch can also make Dr. Jungmun subconsciously read the witch in her sleep and let herself out, just like tonight. Colonel Rick Flagg, who was in charge of monitoring Jungmun in the room, saw his girlfriend returning to his side and quickly stepped forward to hug her tightly. He was still muttering, "It's okay, it's okay." When Dr. Jungmun woke up, she also had a look of panic on her face, and could only tremble in her boyfriend's arms. Just when the two were leaning against each other, they didn't see two green lights shooting towards them instantly. After the green light hit the two of them, they fell directly onto the bed. Then another green light hit Dr. Jungmun, who had fainted. It was George who knocked them unconscious just now. While George, who had already obtained the stone statue, was waiting for the witch, he made an analysis of what would happen when making a deal with the witch. Considering the cunning character of the witch, since the items the witch brought out cannot be trusted, the transaction makes no sense. After careful consideration, George decided that if possible, it would be better to capture the witch directly. Then I kept thinking about the possibilities of the plan. After making many preparations, George implemented the capture plan at the first sight of the witch. Because, the first time he saw the witch, George silently recited legilimency. This spell is a witchcraft in the Harry Potter world that allows one person to obtain other information from another person's mind. Emotional and memory abilities. Legilimency is easier when the caster is close to the target, or when the target is unalert, relaxed, or vulnerable. Eye contact is often critical with legilimency. Therefore, if a legilimency master can use words to make the target look into his eyes, it will be very beneficial for him to cast a spell. It will also make the target's mood fluctuate and awaken related emotions and memories. This is why George keeps communicating with the witch, just to get her to put down her worries. However, the witch was too defensive, so it didn't go well. That is, when George made his last attempt to talk about the sealed topic, perhaps the witch had too deep a memory of this, so at the moment when he looked at George, George successfully found the most crucial information from the witch's memory. Information. All George needs is the means for the witch to be sealed away. In fact, George was already prepared to fail. George's original plan was to give up on the witch temporarily and return to the main body with the stone statue if he failed. Then get the answer you want from the witch's brother. Because as long as you get to the main body, you can directly suppress the soul in the chaotic space. At that time, the interrogation can begin slowly. However, fortunately, in the final stage, George successfully obtained the things in the witch's memory. It turns out that the brother and sister were sealed by a sealing technique thousands of years ago. The difficulty of this sealing technique is that it can only seal the soul body. And this is not a problem for George. After all, in Kamatage, what the ancient master is best at is soul body separation. When Kamatage asked Master Guyi for advice, George naturally did not let go of this spell. So the moment the witch disappeared, George chased after them. After instantly putting the two of them to sleep, he also added a petrification curse to Dr. Jungmun, so that even if the witch woke up, she could not escape. Next, George will copy the sealing circle from that year. He came to the open space in the room and used magic power to draw the magic circle in the witch's memory. After inputting the magic power, the entire magic circle emitted a blue flame. In fact, the blue flame is just the embodiment of magic power, not a real flame, so it has no temperature. George silently recited the levitation spell to control Dr. Jungmun's body to float between George and the magic circle. George used the skills he learned from the ancient wizard and hit Dr. Jungmun in the abdomen. At that moment, as if time was slowed down, the souls of the doctor and the witch were punched out of Dr. Jungmun's body by George. The difference is that the soul of Dr. Jungmun was pushed back by George the moment it left the body. Although the soul of another witch tried hard to struggle outward, it was attracted by the magic circle and entered directly into the middle of the magic circle. The moment the soul flew into the middle of the magic circle, blue flames flew towards the soul like a whirlpool. The soul located in the center of the magic circle continuously begs for mercy and curses when the flame touches the spirit body. In the end, only an artistic statue was left standing on the ground. George picked up the statue and put it directly into the magic bag. After putting the doctor back on the bed, he took a look at the scorch marks on the ground. The repair spell was cast again, and the floor was restored to like new. Then he opened the space door and returned to his apartment. In the next few days, George began to visit major laboratories across the United States. This time, George not only collected information, but also some top experimental equipment. George put them all into the magic bag. As the hero who solved a major crisis for Midway City, I shouldn't take anything from you too much. During this period, George also spent Mondays searching for the alien spacecraft left on the Earth, but this may be due to the local area network used. I searched online for a week on Monday and couldn't find any clues, so I finally gave up. Although spending some more time or staying with some politicians will be fruitful, consider that you can come again in the future. George didn't waste any energy. He took one look at the clean apartment and returned to his true nature. Lying on the soft bed, George recalled that the smooth implementation of the plan to capture the witches was thanks to the various means he had learned. The whole process makes use of the magic in the Harry Potter world, the soul spells learned from Comatage, and the magic circle learned from the witch's memory. These means are indispensable, which also illustrates the importance of knowledge. Thinking of the two statues in the space, George suddenly looked forward to what kind of harvest it would bring to him. Thanks to book friends Qingxian /me and book friend THOR1999 for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you to all book friends for their collections. Thank you to all book friends for your support. End of this chapter. Chapter 91 The satellite is in place. Chapter 91 The satellite is in place. The next day, George first put all the items collected from Suicide Squad into various laboratories, and finally took out the tablets and military satellites. George first cleared out an empty room in the basement and directly assembled the computer room. With his developed brain and multiple shadow clone skills, he installed the computer room very quickly. Then he turned on the tablet, and Monday's mechanical voice appeared in the room again. Master, Monday is at your service. Very good, Monday, connect to the computer in the computer room and start self-test. George ordered. As you order, sir. Next, the green data stream on the tablet in George's hand and the computer screen in the computer room began to refresh like a waterfall. George also observed carefully with all his concentration. Although it is difficult for George to develop an artificial intelligence by himself, through the knowledge he brought in the world of Suicide Squad and through the learning of multiple clones, George can still understand the meaning of the codes on these computers. Finally, after self-inspection, a total of 3 protocol vulnerabilities were discovered. In fact, these 3 places cannot be regarded as loopholes. They can only be said to be backdoors left by Batman for himself, so that he can locate and browse George's running records. However, these methods lost their meaning after George returned to the Marvel world. But for your own safety, you still have to plug the loopholes. George remembered that decades later, there would be more than one artificial intelligence. After eliminating his worries, George took out the satellite again, manually unfolded it, and directly connected Monday to the satellite. In fact, this military satellite was carefully selected by George after careful consideration. It is equipped with the AEHF system to provide global survivability and communication anti-interference capabilities for strategic command and tactical combat personnel. The AEHF system has encryption, low probability of interception and detection, immunity to jamming, and the ability to penetrate electromagnetic interference caused by nuclear weapons. The goal is to provide senior U.S. leaders in the Suicide Squad world with a communications line that can survive a nuclear war. The satellite uses frequency hopping and phased array antenna technology to resist interference, with an uplink of 44 GHz and a downlink of 20 GHz. In fact, there should be 5 supporting satellites, which together form a satellite chain that can provide 24-hour full monitoring of key areas. Of course, although there is only one satellite now, it is completely enough for George to use. Moreover, he also brought back all the data of the satellite this time. If necessary in the future, he can go to that world to bring a few back. Moreover, even this one can only be a semi-finished product for George. Because it was impossible for George to send this satellite into space just like this. It is conceivable that if George sends a satellite into space like this, it will be discovered by astronomers using a space telescope, and then the fun will be great. Moreover, in some places, George planned to use alchemical techniques to strengthen them. Therefore, in the next day, George tried to carve an invisible magic circle on the surface of the satellite without affecting the normal function of the satellite. Fortunately, it was not difficult for George, who had profound alchemy skills, to transform this satellite. A signal receiving device was also installed on the top of a tower in the castle. The night after the modification, George first put a subroutine from Monday into a smartwatch he brought back. Then take out an earphone and put it in your ear, and then put the entire opened satellite into the space. Then he put on his spacesuit and cast a disguise spell on himself. Monday, feel free to report altitude. As you order, sir. Next, George teleported to the highest point of the castle. He raised his head and looked at the deep starry sky. The next moment, George suddenly appeared 100 meters away, but his figure just flashed and disappeared again. Then he appeared in the sky higher up, and then disappeared again. George's figure was like a ghost, flashing in the sky like a continuous picture. Because George's teleportation frequency is too high, and ordinary people's ability to capture images is limited, when more than 10 pictures appear in 1 second, they will be regarded as continuous pictures, and if more than 24 pictures appear, they will be completely indistinguishable. The frequency of George's flashes later exceeded 50 times per second, making it impossible for ordinary people to distinguish with the naked eye. Therefore, in fact, even if George did not cast the disguise curse, ordinary people would not be able to detect George at all. The distance that George teleports each time reaches 100 meters. In this way, the distance George moves in 1 second exceeds 5,000 meters, which is equivalent to 15 times the speed of sound. Moreover, although George's teleportation exceeds the speed of sound, it does not actually move in the air, nor does it break the sound barrier, so there is neither a sonic boom nor a huge noise during high-speed flight. It is completely silent. Of movement. George remembered that satellites in previous lives were usually classified according to different uses: 1 low altitude, 150 to 200 kilometers. The atmosphere has a great influence. The satellite lifespan is 7 to 21 days, and the image resolution of the captured scenery is high. It is often used for reconnaissance satellites. 2 medium altitude, 350-1500 kilometers. There is a certain atmospheric influence. The satellite life is about 1 year, and it is used for Earth resource technology satellites. 3 high altitude, 35,800 kilometers, used for synchronous satellites, with long life and no ground imaging. As for the satellite that George brought back, because the high technology in the world of Suicide Squad is relatively advanced, although this satellite is a high-altitude satellite, it not only has the ability to automatically change its orbit, has a long service life, but can also target the ground. When shooting scenery, the resolution is very high. After teleporting for 3 minutes, George stopped teleporting and used the levitation spell to stand in the air. Sir, your current altitude is 15,000 meters. The reason why I used teleportation just now was to hide. If you use Karmataj's space door, a golden fire will be produced, which is too obvious at night. Therefore, now standing at an altitude of 1 meters, George naturally does not worry about this problem. If you want to reach the height of a high-altitude satellite, which is an altitude of 35,800 kilometers, it will be too time-consuming to use teleportation. Therefore, after reaching a certain height, George still used the most suitable method at the moment, Karmataj's secret space method. The next moment, a golden secret door appeared 10,000 meters in the sky, and George floated directly into it. What place is 1 meters? It has reached the troposphere of the Earth, so it is necessary to cast a suspension spell to stop the falling trend. The moment George entered the space door, he immediately experienced the feeling of weightlessness, and his whole body was completely unconcerned. Power, so George has come to space, taken out solar panels from space, and deployed a 5,000-meter-long military satellite. Monday, connect to satellite and report altitude. Sir, your current altitude is 35,000 kilometers. Then when you reach the final predetermined position, can you control it automatically? Yes, sir. After you return, I can control the satellite to automatically reach the predetermined position. Okay. Let's get started, George said. The next second, George came to a position 100 meters away from the satellite, looked at the satellite that originally moved with the Earth's gravity, and opened a vent. As blue flames erupted, the satellite moved into the distance. George retracted his gaze and looked into space again. At this time, all George felt was loneliness, and there was no sound around him. But in that unknown corner, there are countless alien races, many of which are hostile to the Earth. So, at this moment, George felt weak again. On Earth, I may be very powerful, but now, I came to space for the first time with the help of a spacesuit. Now George's physical strength should be able to survive in space with the help of a breathing helmet like the future Star-Lord. However, without 100% certainty, George would not dare to gamble with his life. Look at the blue planet in front of you, it is so beautiful, and the Earth is just an ordinary blue dot in the universe, so insignificant, so small, but it carries the lives of billions of people. All of them human beings have grown up dependent on this planet. Now human beings are like being trapped in this cage, and the trapped animals cannot get out. And George believes that one day he will rely on his own efforts to break through this prison and observe the outside world. Thanks to book friend Kylan is not a demon and book friend THOR1999 for their recommendation votes. Thanks to several book friends for collecting it. Thank you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 92 Shortboard. Chapter 92 Shortboard. On the third day after returning to Earth from space, George was still in the library, starting to study various materials brought back from his previous life through his clone. The main body also looked at the various materials that he had compiled since Monday. Sir, the White House has sent documents, and President Roosevelt has personally asked if the family can provide more positions. At this time, little Fred came to George's side and said. George motioned for him to continue speaking nonchalantly. The White House hopes that each family will open up more jobs, lower commodity prices, give up some benefits, and get out of the economic crisis as soon as possible. Okay, I understand. Tell President Roosevelt that I will take action in agriculture next. The supermarket will also provide some relief food to women and children. As for the men, let them go to the mines, there is no shortage their jobs. Inform the heads of various mining areas in the country to increase mining efforts and expand production capacity. Okay, sir. Okay, you go out first. Yes, sir. After saying that, he bowed slightly and turned to leave. After little Fred left, George picked up the land information collected on Monday. This information contains the operating conditions of all farms and pastures currently controlled by George. Considering the future war situation, George began to plan the next step of industrial layout. The first step was agriculture. The existing land could not satisfy George's appetite at all. Although under the influence of the economic crisis, George's National Bank received a large amount of mortgaged land. These lands are now owned by George after the farmers lost their ability to repay their debts, but there is still potential for further exploration. George plans to buy a large amount of land around the country in the city where his supermarket is located. Grow various crops and develop breeding industry. The second step is to establish a canning production line. Pay more attention to the taste and nutrition of canned food. Canned various vegetables and meats. The third step is to mine. Earlier, George used his foresight to occupy a large number of precious metal mines, as well as oil mines, uranium mines, etc. in Australia and the United States. Now it can be mined vigorously. Anyway, manpower is very cheap now, so there is no need to worry about it at all. After making several other industrial development plans, George gave the plan to Fred Jr. the next day and asked him to pass it on to others. The company executives under George will naturally know what to do after seeing the plan. With the issuance of the plan, the entire force belonging to George began to move quickly. Some other families thought that George was responding to the White House's call. After all, everyone with a discerning eye knew that George contributed the most when Roosevelt came to power. But Roosevelt in the White House couldn't see clearly, because since he became president, the family has still not made any excessive demands as before, including the fact that he has made provisions for family inheritance in the inheritance bill. This is obvious. The other party still did not respond to the policy of restricting the Tesla family. However, Roosevelt now has too many things to deal with. It is a good thing that the family has not put pressure on him, so Roosevelt will not take the initiative to explore the reasons. Another month later, George finally finished handling the business matters. Although George leaves everything to his subordinates, as part of the company's strategic adjustments, some things require his personal signature and confirmation. No matter how great economic achievements are, it also paves the way for strength. George can still distinguish the primary and secondary relationships here. At night, George stood on a terrace of the castle and looked up at the starry sky. The night sky in this era was still relatively clear. The starlight falling from the Milky Way is mottled. George has been observing the stars in the sky for a long time on nights like this. Of course, this is not to study star divination. Although George learned divination knowledge from Nico Flamel, George has never used it once. Because George already knows a lot about the future, so leaving some unknowns for yourself will make life more interesting, right? George recalled the interrogation of the witch brother and sister in space today, and found that the harvest was not very great. He learned that it was an accident that the two traveled to that world. So it doesn't help George. The magic of both brothers and sisters is based on instinct, and there is no possibility of learning. Thinking about it, Amanda in that world, a person full of desire for power and power, would not look for help among criminals if she could force out the secret of magic from a witch. Since George couldn't control the two brothers yet, he could only continue to seal the two people, and wait until George had the corresponding means to deal with them. George then compared his own strength in many aspects. The first is magic ability, which is by far George's best skill. Combining the magic of the Harry Potter world and the secret method of Carmitage, in terms of combat effectiveness alone, George is at the level of Doctor Strange, who does not use the Time Stone, and his strength is still very strong. The second is firearms shooting ability. In this regard, George's ability has reached the peak of ordinary people. Of course, this is just the peak of ordinary people. George is still envious of the powerful shooting skills shown in many movies and TV shows. The final unarmed combat ability, regardless of physical fitness and the defense and recovery power derived from corpse veins, is the level of ordinary special forces. After all, this skill was only obtained from Deadshot, and Deadshot itself did not last 3 rounds in Batman's hands. It can be seen that George still has deep shortcomings in this aspect, which is why George declined when Bruce Wayne had just finished strengthening and wanted to compete with George. After all, it was just a clone. And there were other important things to deal with at the time. This time, George is preparing to enter the world of Suicide Squad in person, because in addition to wanting to use Bruce to train his hand-to-hand combat ability, on the other hand, considering that he has plenty of time, he can also plan for 2 more technologies that are far ahead of the times. As for his shooting ability, George once wanted to improve his shooting ability through self-study. He also sought out killer organizations like textile factories in this world to learn arc shooting and other skills, but unfortunately all failed. After being prepared, and leaving a clone behind in reality, George used his real body to enter the small world for the first time. This is no different than a clone entering a small world. More than a month later, George appeared again in the apartment he rented in Midway City. Since the goal this time was relatively clear, George did not stay much longer. Instead, he directly separated a clone and arranged for this clone to go towards the metropolis. And George's body appeared directly in Bruce's secret base at the next moment. George's way to improve his fighting ability is very simple, that is, to use Batman Bruce Wayne as a sparring partner to train his fighting skills. As for whether Batman would agree to be his sparring partner, George had also thought about it. However, with Bruce's suspicious personality, he will definitely not give up this opportunity to directly collect George's data. In George's view, this should be regarded as a win-win result. As for Bruce's actual thoughts, George will not care. And just when George was training hard to improve his strength, Dr. Erkins in Germany was caught in a tangle in the real world. Because just now, Schmidt came over again and asked him to start experiments directly on the human body. Schmidt was a little impatient. Now he urgently needed an invention beyond ordinary to prove the value of his Hydra. Dr. Abraham Erskine, I think we should follow your commander's advice and start human experiments directly. An assistant next to him said. Echo, although the current underlying model and theory are complete, they are not yet mature. At this time, the failure rate for human experiments is too low. It would be fine if the human experiments failed. Anyway, it just consumes some prisoners. The data obtained from direct in vivo operations can help us make faster deductions. Echo said, you also saw the attitude of Commander Schmidt just now. Well, even if there is no result, he won't kill you, but our assistants will definitely be killed, so you don't have to do it. We will do it. Thank you to Book Friends. Kylan is not a demon. Book Friends 202003121533202242. Book Friends THOR1999. Book Friends 20210301106593811486. Book Friends Unlimited Overhead. Thank you all Book Friends for your recommendation votes. Thanks. Thanks also to all the Book Friends for collecting it. End of this chapter. Chapter 93 Parallel World. Chapter 93 Parallel World. George, who is actually in the world of Suicide Squad, is having a very fulfilling life these days. On this day, George and Bruce are training with Bruce on the fighting stage. Boom, 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 the clash of fists and the sound of fist-to-flesh impact makes adrenaline soar. Both of them were punching extremely fast, and it didn't look like they were sparring at all, but like they were engaging in an endless fight. Various fighting skills were displayed on the two of them. In the brief moment after the two exchanged punches, George's movements paused momentarily. It was this brief mistake that Bruce, who was experienced in fighting, noticed. Bruce stepped forward and was about to launch another rapid attack. The moment Bruce approached, George reacted quickly. He completed a sidekick at a speed much faster than Bruce, forcing Bruce to stop and raise his knees to block. However, the sidekick stopped before it hit Bruce. Putting down his right leg, George said, "Okay, Bruce, let's stop here for now. I have some things that need to be dealt with." It has been half a year since George found Bruce and started fighting training. In fact, in the first month, George was able to fight Bruce without the batsuit. Later, George quietly adjusted his physical fitness to the same level as Bruce. Now George has begun fighting training wearing a batsuit. After being strengthened by the heart-shaped grass, Bruce Wayne's physical fitness has reached 3 times the peak level of ordinary people. Coupled with the bonus of the batsuit, it is at least 6 times that of ordinary people, or even a higher level. After all, the combination of the two has an effect of 1 + 1 greater than 2. During the training just now, George suddenly received a message from his clone who stayed in the Marvel world, using himself as the carrier. On this day, the clone was in the castle as usual, reading a book and drinking tea. In the evening, I sometimes play with the teenagers on the lawn. Just during dinner, the clone received an international call from the UK. The content of the phone call means that King George V of England is in very poor health and his time is expected to be short. So we prepared to summon some nobles, and George was also included in the summons this time. As for the British side, George is also very concerned about it. Not to mention the huge industry that George now owns in the UK and the massive antiques and art he bought from the down-and-out British nobles. As one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, George cannot be allowed to relax. After all, if he can control this seat in the future, it will definitely have a beneficial impact on some of George's actions. After getting the news, the clone did not delay. Instead, after returning to the room, he directly unlocked the spell himself and passed the news back to the main body through the connection with the main body. Therefore, there was a brief pause at the moment when George accepted the news about his doppelganger. "Why, is the Archmage going to save the world again?" Bruce said. With George coming over this time, he and Bruce discussed each other every day. From the previous suspicion to now joking with each other, the relationship between the two has also improved a lot. At least, Bruce now no longer thinks about how to subdue George. Although part of the reason was that he clearly realized that he was indeed no match for George, the more important reason was that George once gave Bruce a Batmobile in exchange for a break during training between the two. Release the stone statue of the witch with the witch sealed in it, and let Bruce see the witch's style. It was only after this time that Bruce believed to a certain extent the good person character George had set for himself. Of course, the witch was taken in the end and was still kept in the space to eat ashes. It's just some personal matters that need to be dealt with. "This world is very safe with heroes like you," George said. After half a year of observation, George discovered that this is just a parallel world that exists as the story of Suicide Squad. Some things later than this timeline did not happen. For example, in the original timeline, the Suicide Squad and others would be arranged to deal with the story of a small country studying starfish-like alien creatures not long after they eliminated the Witch brothers and sisters. However, in fact, George sent a clone to the swamp to monitor Harley Quinn and others. It was discovered that there was no follow-up story, because not long after Harley Quinn was selected by Amanda, the clown broke into the Black Prison and was taken away directly. In this way, the content of the second episode will naturally disappear. This also proves George's guess from the side that this is just a parallel space among many DC world universes. In this world, George has changed the outcome of some things. That is to say, George may enter other DC Universe worlds in the future. George can get to know many Batmans, and these Batmans will get to know George again every time. Of course, George has only entered this DC world now, and George's guess needs to be confirmed. After casting a cleaning spell on himself and Bruce to let Bruce experience the magic of magic again, George said, "Well, goodbye, Bruce. I will come to you again if necessary." After cleaning up, George quietly dismissed many of his clones in this world. Even though George came to this world for the purpose of training his fighting ability, he would not waste his time in vain. Therefore, at the beginning of entering this world, some clones were arranged to study, and some clones were arranged to conduct alchemy experiments. After all, as some knowledge, it does not mean that you can just remember the knowledge. Practical ability is still very important. Among them, the most important task among these clones is to monitor the Star Point Laboratory in Metropolis, which is the laboratory where the Flash is located. After half a year of surveillance and intrusion into the opponent's computer room, George has learned the ability to use technology to obtain the Speed Force from Professor Speed, also known as Reverse Flash. Moreover, George also secretly made such a set of equipment and brought it into the space. However, George did not experiment with the speed ability in order not to attract the attention of other speedsters. Moreover, George had some conjectures that needed to be confirmed. After taking back all the clones, George spent a minute sorting out his memories. The world where the clones left this time was indeed a bit too long. It still takes some time to digest the memory. But it was only 1 minute, after all. George's thinking speed was already very fast now. Back in the Marvel world, George informed Fred Jr. to arrange a flight. After years of research and development, Boeing and the others have already developed an aircraft that satisfies George, and George immediately assigned himself a special plane. Although George has many ways to teleport, he still pays attention to this speed when attending some public places. After all, it's not yet an era when heroes are everywhere and there are as many aliens as dogs. Thank you to Book Friends 202103011065938114886, Book Friend THOR1999, Book Friend Kylan is not a demon, and Book Friend Ruthless Hwang. Thank you to all book friends for your recommendation votes, thanks. Thank you also to all book friends for your comments and collections. End of this chapter. Chapter 94 Princess. Chapter 94 Princess. George's special plane landed in the holy city of Jerusalem. As soon as it stopped, there were nearly 40 black cars waiting on the tarmac. All the top legislators from the entire peninsula came to pick him up after receiving the news in advance. After the unification of the entire peninsula, the city was designated as the capital by George. So now this city is called the Holy Capital by the people of the peninsula. This holy capital of the three religions has once again blossomed under George's transformation. In order to take care of religious beliefs, George built a new city to the east of the old city. With a prosperous economy and abundant material life, this city has become the place with the best security in the entire peninsula. Religious freedom throughout Jerusalem. Considering the future development of the city, George also deliberately built a new extra-long airstrip here. Of course there is a reason why George deliberately stopped here this time. Because, judging from the time, the war is about to start. For the safety of the peninsula, George must make preparations in advance. George walked between the two rows of people and got directly into the customized limousine. After the car started, the entire convoy drove towards the location of the military base. On the surface, the entire peninsula has achieved independence, and the peninsula family exercises self-government. Britain is no longer the suzerain of the peninsula, and George, the governor, has also lost his entire territory and only serves as the honorary speaker of the country in name. In fact, the entire peninsula has been under George's control from beginning to end, and George still has the final say here. The fundamental reason why George worked so hard to hide his identity was that he wanted to completely separate himself from European countries. Otherwise, once World War II breaks out, the peninsula will definitely be affected. Over the years, George has sold a large number of advanced weapons and equipment to the peninsula in his own name. They range from warships, planes, and tanks to military uniforms and bullets. In fact, in terms of armaments and military quality, the level of the entire peninsula is higher than that of some European countries. Accompanied by many members of Congress, George inspected the military base. George is very satisfied with the construction of the base and the training of soldiers. After all, these soldiers are trained according to the most advanced military management methods. With these equipment and personnel, there is no problem in protecting the security of the entire peninsula. Not to mention, George also trained some masters for these congressmen. Those people gathered together are also a force that cannot be ignored. In the Parliament Hall, there is a high platform directly opposite the door. On the high platform is an extremely gorgeous and majestic chair. This seat is made of gold and inlaid with countless gems. At this time, the throne welcomed its owner. George walked up to the high platform step by step, turned around, looked at the congressman standing under the high platform, and slowly came down. All the members knelt down on one knee, put their right hands on their chests, lowered their heads, and said in unison, "King." George nodded and said, "Everyone, get up. Take a seat. Members of Congress, I am very happy to see that the entire peninsula has achieved prosperity and stability thanks to your efforts. These are all your contributions, and I will not forget your contributions." Next, George analyzed the entire world situation and accurately stated that World War II would definitely break out and the United Arab Kingdom needed to be prepared. Then a series of plans were made. The most critical one was to collect grain. After all, there is very little arable land on the entire peninsula. To meet the living needs of the people on the entire peninsula, they rely heavily on imports. Once a war breaks out and transportation is restricted, food shortages will result. Therefore, this part of the preparation work must be done well. The second is to stand on the right side of the issue. You certainly cannot stand on the side of the Nazis, but it is also impossible to stand on the side of Britain and France from the beginning. George's policy was to remain neutral at first and sell large amounts of oil to Britain, France, and other countries. With the establishment of mechanized forces such as tanks, strategic materials such as oil are of great importance. So you can make a lot of money from Britain and France. Then, at a critical moment, he joined the British and French forces. In this way, after the entire war is over, the United Arab Kingdom can reasonably demand war dividends and receive compensation as a victor. If under the original conditions, the peninsula would still be under George's rule without independence. After the war broke out, neither Britain nor the United States asked George to notify the peninsula to join the war, and George could not refuse. It's different now. It can be said that we can advance or retreat as we please. After spending a day in Arabia and arranging all the follow-up matters, George took a plane to England again. After landing, the only people who came to pick him up this time were George's company personnel. As soon as he returned to his villa on Kensington Palace Gardens in West London, George received an invitation to a banquet from Duke Mountbatten. The next day, George came to the Duke's suburban manor. There were many guests at the banquet, and everyone was a person of high status. As soon as George came on the scene, he immediately became the focus of the audience. The deeds of the Earl of Swent have always been talked about in British aristocratic circles. From being abandoned in the United States, to discovering penicillin, becoming an earl, and then becoming independent after exchanging territories, losing territory in disguise, and then in recent years, new inventions have been constantly coming out, and he is known as the most genius inventor. Moreover, the Earl of Swent also had considerable achievements in literature. Several of the published books are very popular among readers, especially the Harry Potter series, which have been directly canonized as sacred books. There is also the DC comic series being published, which is also well received. What is even more interesting is that at that time, the Arab United Nations gave George 20% of the entire national asset company and a symbolic seat in order to gain independence. Just when the outside world thought that after George acquired the ownership of the canal, he did not care about the entire peninsula at all, let alone wanted to be responsible for the peninsula, so he accepted the independence of the peninsula. What others didn't expect was that the seemingly inconspicuous 20% of the shares now represented an immeasurable amount of wealth. Although George was already very rich, the significance of this share represented to some people times were completely different. In the past 2 years, there has been a talk in the UK about taking back the peninsula. Don't think this is a joke. When everyone sees the wealth contained in it, no one is unmoved. In fact, some people have long wanted to provoke conflicts between the original families, support the independence of a certain member of the parliament, and cause internal chaos. Then, these external forces get involved in various names. But what the forces who provoked the trouble did not expect was that no matter how they provoked the situation, the entire Arab United Nations was extremely united. Even if he assassinated a certain member of the Congress's family by framing the case, he failed in the end and had to give up. After all, there are some things that these self-proclaimed nobles still need to pay attention to. Therefore, the shares held by George become even sweeter. There were offers from both the UK and the US to buy some shares, but George rejected the offer on the grounds that the agreement stipulated that they could not be resold. At that time, George also specially arranged for diplomats from the United Arab Kingdom to issue an announcement to inform them of this part of the agreement. Long time no see, Earl Swent, thank you for coming to this banquet. Duke Mountbatten took the initiative to say hello after seeing George. Hello, distinguished Duke, I am very honored to receive your invitation. George said after greeting the Duke with aristocratic etiquette. The Duke of Mountbatten has also made huge profits over the years by serving as the main representative of British penicillin. Therefore, the relationship between the two is still very good under deliberate management. Gentlemen and ladies, welcome to your arrival. Next, I hope you all have a good time. Here's to the kingdom. To the kingdom. To the kingdom. Under the leadership of Mountbatten, everyone raised their glasses. At this time, Duke Mountbatten was already quite old, so after greeting everyone, he was ready to find a quiet place with George to exchange some things. At this moment, the closed banquet door opened again. One was wearing a long white dress, with a pure face, watery eyes, black hair, flaming red lips, a sweet smile, and exposed white shoulders on the right side. She was very sexy and charming. With the squeaking sound of the door opening, I walked into the banquet hall. George and Duke Mountbatten also looked at the gate immediately. "Who is this lady?" George asked, looking at Duke Mountbatten aside. Princess Victoria Louise Alice, Your Majesty's niece." Thanks to book friend THOR1999, book friend 20210301106593811486, book friend Diving Turtle, book friend Kylan is not a demon, and thank all book friends for their recommendation votes. Thanks. Thank you also to all book friends for your comments and collections. End of this chapter. Chapter 95 England. Chapter 95 England. Duke Mountbatten was also surprised when he saw the princess arriving. However, as the host, he still took the initiative to greet me and said, "You are very welcome, Your Highness Alice." Princess Alice held up the hem of her skirt and said slightly in return, "Thank you, Your Majesty the Duke." At this moment, another girl wearing a red evening gown with blonde hair and a pretty face walked quickly to Alice's side, took Alice's arm and said to Duke Mountbatten, "Father, I'm very sorry for not informing you in advance that it was I who invited Your Highness Alice." "Haha, it doesn't matter. I will definitely welcome Your Highness Alice to come. Then you have a good time." After a few more conversations, Duke Mountbatten said, "Your Highness, I am very sorry, I still have guest, I will excuse myself for a moment." After confessing to Alice, Mountbatten returned to George. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting, George," Duke Mountbatten said. When he first met George, Duke Mountbatten could still treat George as an elder and a duke, but as George grew up, especially now, through the opportunities given by George, he can make a lot of money every year. Funds. Now Duke Mountbatten no longer dares to look down upon the man in front of him, who although he has grown a beard, still looks young. "Where, let's go, the Duke invited me here and there must be something else to talk about." George smiled. "Haha, yes, George. Come with me. I'm not the only one who wants to see you tonight." Before leaving, George looked towards Princess Alice and found that the two girls over there were also looking towards George. For a moment, their eyes met. George nodded politely and smiled, while Her Royal Highness Alice immediately turned around shyly. Until George left, he could still hear the silver bell-like laughter coming from there. During the conversation with the Duke, George learned that Her Royal Highness Alice was only 18 years old this year, and her parents were shipwrecked while out at sea when Her Royal Highness was young. Therefore, His Royal Highness Alice was raised by His Royal Highness George V since she was a child. Although Her Royal Highness Alice is only the niece of His Majesty the King, she is treated and loved no less than other princes and princesses. Instead, she was favored by the royal family because of her life experience. However, Her Royal Highness Alice is usually at the palace and rarely goes out to attend aristocratic gatherings. As they talked, the two came to a reception room. At this time, there were already several gentlemen waiting here in the reception room. It turned out that the Arabian Peninsula was vigorously developing overseas markets after obtaining the technology for cross-ocean transportation of natural gas from George. Some British nobles took a fancy to the profits, so they were ready to drag George along and want a piece of the pie. Of course, George would not refuse this matter, but he also made his own demands at the same time. Of course, they only need to make a preliminary intention. Specific matters will be handled by professional personnel. During the chat, George also asked about being invited by the king this time. Sure enough, George guessed it as expected. This summons was just to pave the way for the next king. The next day, George met His Majesty George V, who had knighted him that year, at Buckingham Palace. After the meeting, George V knew that George liked to collect art from various countries, and specially arranged for Prince Albert to accompany him to visit Buckingham Palace. There was also a dinner to attend in the evening, so George did not refuse. Unexpectedly, I met a lady while visiting the royal stables. "Hello, Your Highness Alice." "Hello, Count Svent." After Her Royal Highness Alice learned that the two were planning to visit the palace, she took the initiative to take on the role of interpreter. George and George did not refuse, and during the visit, Prince Albert excused himself and left, so the two of them wandered around the palace alone. At first, the two of them were talking about the royal collections. Later, it turned into a discussion about art. Then the topics became richer, but most of them were Alice asking questions and George answering. After all, George knew not only a lot, but also far beyond his time. So, later it became Alice asking George for advice. Before I knew it, it was already very late. At this time, Prince Albert, who had just left, appeared again. "George, the dinner is about to start, let's go over first," Prince Albert said. "Okay, please wait a moment." After George finished speaking, he turned to Alice and said, "Thank you very much, Alice. We had a great chat this afternoon. I should be the one thanking you. You answered so many questions for me." Princess Alice replied. "Haha, goodbye Alice." "Goodbye, George." Watching the two people across from each other saying goodbye to each other, Prince Albert couldn't help but smile meaningfully. After attending the dinner, George left Buckingham Palace and returned to his villa. Early the next morning, Duke Mountbatten came to George's house. "Oh, Duke Mountbatten, what's the matter so early?" "Hee, yes, George. I will take you to a special place today." After George finished packing, he followed Duke Mountbatten into a car. After entering a tailor shop, the two walked through a corridor and finally stopped at the door of a fitting room. "Follow me, George." After speaking, he opened the door and walked in. George looked at the door, and then quickly followed in. At this time, the large glass of the fitting room inside had been opened, revealing a small train track. After the two got on a small train, the train started. 5 minutes later, the two came to an underground space. "How about it, George? I have to say, it's still very secretive. Haha, this is the last strength of our nobles. It turns out that this place is the last armed force controlled by the nobles themselves, called Kingsmen. It was an armed force established by the Duke of Oxford to protect the nobility during World War I. Then why did you bring me here?" "Oh, that's right, I am the leader of this term. But I am more optimistic about you. So I want to ask you to join here." "Forget it, I spend most of my time in the United States, and I still have a lot of time to do. Where is the time management?" George rejected Duke Mountbatten's proposal without thinking. Managing Kingsmen may be a good job in the eyes of many people, but it means nothing to George. "Don't be in a hurry to refuse. The reason why I like you is because you have no contact with other nobles. You are still so rich, so you will deal with the problem more fairly," Duke Mountbatten said, "and this power is its very good. I'll take you to see it." After that, he took George to a training ground. The venue is very large and has many training areas. Shooting training is held in a remote place. I saw a 15 or 16-year-old girl holding a gun with both hands and pulling the trigger one after another. 10 bullets went out in an instant and hit the target directly, and they hit the bullseye. There are a few similar kids in the back who are also training, but their results are not as good as the girls. "What's the girl's name?" Duke Mountbatten asked a base instructor on the side. "Carter, Peggy Carter." "Sir." Thanks to book friend 202103011065938114886, book friend THOR1999, book friend Kylan is not a demon, book friend unlimited imagination, book friend understands my brother. Thank you all book friends for your recommendation votes, thanks. Thank you also to all book friends for your comments and collections. End of this chapter. Chapter 96 Nine-Headed Snake in Action. Chapter 96 Hydra in Action. Peggy Carter, the girlfriend of Steve Rogers in Captain America, founded SHIELD with the Strategic Scientific Reserve after Captain America disappeared and continued to save the world, hoping that Captain America would come back. In the previous movies, the actual origin of Agent Carter was never explained. George did not expect to see the girlfriend who influenced Captain America here. From the performance of this girl now, we can see how heroic she is. Duke Mountbatten, who was accompanying him, saw that George seemed to be very interested in agent training and said, "Every agent of Kingsman has undergone rigorous training and is proficient in various special skills. It's obvious that I can provide some financial support for Kingsman, but just come here to work. After all, you can't afford my salary, can you?" "Haha," George said with a smile. "That's true. Who doesn't know that Earl Svent is the richest nobleman now? Think about it slowly and don't be in a hurry," Duke Mountbatten said. "In fact, I decided to let George manage Kingsman this time. The rest are all excuses. The most important thing is that with the rapid development of the United States, Britain, the former world's most powerful country, has gradually lost its status. It can be said that this time the Great Depression in the United States is the bitter fruit of the United States' attempt to replace the British pound with the US dollar as the international currency, but was eventually set up by European countries led by the United Kingdom. Aware of crisis, the British royal family wanted to win over George. Because after in-depth analysis of George by multiple departments, it was found that George has the ability to manipulate the US market at will. If George completely turns to the British side at this time, then George can be used to carry out a deep blow to the US market, which will at least set the US economy back 10 to 20 years. There is no need to doubt the authenticity of this intelligence. It can be seen from several aspects. One is oil and energy. George's actual ability can completely defeat American oil and energy companies. The second is mineral resources, and George owns 75% of the precious resources in the United States. The third is banks. George is one of the owners of the Federal Reserve. The fourth is the media industry. George owns the largest media group in the United States. Whoever controls the tongue in the United States is justice. This does not include George's achievements in other areas, so it is not difficult to understand that the British side is actively striving for George. It is a pity that George knows that the reason why he is able to do well in both Britain and the United States is that he only does business on the surface and never participates in the game between countries. The next day, George received another invitation. But this inviter surprised George. Because the person who sent the invitation letter was the eldest prince whom he had just met at Buckingham Palace 2 days ago, the first heir to the British king, Prince Edward. It can be said that the old king summoned George and others to formally pave the way for this person this time, so it was really inconvenient for George to refuse the heir who was about to ascend the British throne. That afternoon, George drove to Edward's suburban estate. This manor occupies a large area and is backed by mountains. The reason Prince Edward invited George over was also to invite George to hunt with him. George did not like this traditional aristocratic sport. It's not because of cruelty or anything. George is not a virgin, it's mainly because it's boring and too simple. After all, where is George's strength now? After George arrived, he received a warm welcome again. Of course, George was not the only one invited to this event, so that he could be accompanied by some other minor nobles. It can be said that the whole atmosphere is very harmonious, and it is a harmonious scene where the emperor and his ministers are enjoying themselves together. During this period, Prince Edward also introduced a woman named Wallis Simpson to everyone. It was just an accessory on the woman named Wallis Simpson that caught George's attention. Because George had seen a badge similar to this accessory before. The badge he had seen before was in the shape of a sheep's head, with the two horns of the sheep's head bent into curls. The image of this one that George saw on Simpson's clothes was an image that resembled an octopus. Coincidentally, George knew that this seemingly inconspicuous badge represented the official Hydra. George didn't care how a prince who was about to inherit the throne got involved with Hydra, but he didn't stop him from making a bet first. So when George returned to the villa on the third day, he asked the butler to give a piece of art to Prince Albert, who had previously led George to visit Buckingham Palace. The reason was to thank Prince Albert for accompanying him to visit. As for George giving this gift, the reason is very simple, that is, Prince Albert is the second heir to the throne. No matter who the future British throne belongs to, George sees no harm in placing a bet. Moreover, now that Hydra has begun to reach out to Britain, it can be seen that the war is getting closer. That night, George recruited his men responsible for intelligence collection and arranged for them to collect all information about Wallace Simpson. George would not judge a thing subjectively based on an accessory, so an in-depth investigation was needed. Then, George once again handed over a mission codenamed Shadow. This mission was a long-term mission, and the net would only be closed when George felt it was appropriate. After explaining the mission requirements in detail, let them go down and prepare. The next day, details about Wallace Simpson appeared on George's desk. Sure enough, as George expected, from some things in Wallace Simpson's past, George discovered that Ms. Wallace Simpson was a member of Hydra. George had no intention of alerting the snake. Some things only made sense when they broke out at the right time. After letting the surveillance personnel continue to monitor, George stopped caring about things here. The supreme and powerful god King Odin, the king of the Nine Realms, holds the Spear of Eternity and leads the Asgardian army to sweep away the frost giants from Jotunheim and seize the ice box, protecting. Once we reach the atrium, peace will be restored to the Nine Realms. John Schmidt was flipping through a thick ancient book with a rotting atmosphere. This book recorded the story of god King Odin defeating the frost giants in Norse mythology. It also recorded that before god King Odin returned to God's domain, a treasure of infinite power was hidden in the world. After the new Prime Minister Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany, under Hitler's encouragement, there was an inexplicable fanaticism. He believed that the German nation was the best nation, and the German people developed an extreme sense of superiority. On the one hand, due to the defeat in the First World War, huge war reparations, and the Great Depression, people's lives were becoming more and more miserable, and on the other hand, there was a crazy sense of national superiority. This intensified the hostility of the entire German and German nation. As Schmidt has been in charge of the weapons development department in the past few years, the development of new weapons, such as tanks, artificial exoskeletons, biological and chemical weapons and other extermination weapons, has aroused Schmidt's extreme desire for power control. Boom boom boom. The new tank in front of us is undergoing live ammunition exercises. This new tank can only be designed and built by engineer Dr. Arnim Zola. Dr. Zola is an exiled senior engineer and geneticist from Switzerland. He is 1 meter tall, timid, and cunning. He was expelled from the formal experimental department because he did many crazy experiments that violated morality and law in Switzerland. The power is very good, Dr. Zola. I believe these new tanks will be put to use soon. And help me keep an eye on Dr. Abraham Erskine. I need to get the results as soon as possible. Yes, sir. Thank you to Book Friends 202103011065938114886, Book Friends THOR1999, Book Friends Kylan is not a demon, Book Friends Unlimited Ideas. Thank you all Book Friends for your recommendation votes, thanks. Thank you also to all Book Friends for your comments and collections. New books require data such as collections and recommendation votes, so all Book Friends, please support me, thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 97 Gossip. Chapter 97 Gossip. July 1935. George returned to the United States after staying in London for a month. The reason is that a few days ago, Buckingham Palace will hold another grand dinner to celebrate the birthday of British King George V. So even George, who didn't like this kind of social interaction, had to participate. Fortunately, George's favorite Princess Alice accompanied him at the banquet that night, so George did not feel bored, but felt that time passed quickly. The day after the banquet, George flew directly back to the United States. So what he didn't notice was that the Times, the largest newspaper in the UK that day, made extensive reports on last night's birthday party. It also published 2 photos, one of the royal family and members of the aristocracy standing together, and the other of a photo at a ball that night. People will naturally discuss the characters in these 2 photos. Among them, George is the most topical. One reason is that most of the people who can appear in the first photo are already familiar with him, and the other reason is that George's own appearance also attracts attention. Next, not only the Times, but also national newspapers such as Italy, France, and the United States reported on the banquet that night. After all, there is still too little coverage of royal life in this era. People are quite curious about the life of the royal family, so it naturally attracts attention. Here, there is a British newspaper. The reporting angle is relatively remote, but it was quickly reproduced by other media. This newspaper not only reported on George's situation, posted a photo of him standing with the royal family, but also specifically marked the center position of the ball in the Times photo. During the interpretation of the photo, the public discovered that the princess, who is not well known to the public, was indeed looking in the direction of George when the photo was taken. The second picture is directly of the two dancing in the middle of the dance floor. In the commentary, it says so. The reporter had the honor to attend this banquet. During the banquet, the two people stayed together throughout the banquet. Except for 2 dances with each other, they refused all invitations to dance. Judging from the performance of the 2 people at the banquet, one can't help but feel people's imaginations are running wild. This nearly word report basically describes a love story in the form of speculation. This kind of celebrity scandal stories are what people like the most. When people read newspapers, the most they can do is to understand many news reports, but when it comes to scandals, they generally pay attention to them with great curiosity. Moreover, the center of this scandal is the well-known American figure George and the most beautiful and youngest princess in the United Kingdom. People naturally like to read this kind of news. Moreover, Princess Alice's experience of losing her parents when she was young, being treated as one of her own by the king, and being cared for by the entire royal family since childhood is also a news point in itself. Then, various tabloids began to fabricate romantic stories about the two. Reports from the United Kingdom quickly spread to the United States, and they were even more excited to hear about the romantic story between the country's richest man and the British princess. What's interesting is that George is a citizen of both countries, and people in the United Kingdom and the United States regard George as one of their own. Therefore, although some people may feel sad about this scandal, the two of them are quite a match in terms of status, financial resources, and knowledge. When George saw the newspapers that Fred personally delivered and the various romantic stories that he specially collected, he felt dumbfounded. George knew that the people below were asking him about his attitude and whether he needed to respond to this matter. After taking a look at the butler who was standing straight but whose eyes were still drifting towards the gossip reports from time to time, George said, "The newspapers are all fabricated. I guess the British royal family will come back to clarify it. Inform ourselves. For newspapers, just don't report on it. Don't worry about other things." But this time, George miscalculated. Because in the next few days, the British royal family did not come forward to clarify this matter. Now, George roughly knew what he meant. "I was previously invited to take charge of Kingsmen, but I gave up. If they are tied together through a princess this time, the royal family should be happy to see it happen. Maybe, there are some nobles like Duke Mountbatten who are related to their own interests behind the scenes, adding fuel to the fire." Buckingham Palace. After seeing the newspaper report, members of the royal family also felt that the photo was indeed inappropriate. Under normal circumstances, there should be someone responsible for reviewing such photos before they are circulated. In the photo of the two dancing, the two were smiling. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were affectionate. Although everyone, including the king, is happy to see this matter come to fruition, Alice's opinion is also important. If Alice didn't mean this, it would be better to clarify the matter early. Therefore, the eldest princess of the royal family, Princess Mary, went to inquire about the situation. Princess Mary came to Princess Alice's bedroom, where Princess Alice was reading a book. Princess Mary sat next to her sister and said softly, "Alice, have you seen the report about you and Earl Swent? You have made up so many romantic stories. It would be a pity not to become a screenwriter. Although many of the stories written in this article are fabricated, if you really like each other, we will support it. For Earl Svent, my father is quite satisfied, so you are. What's your opinion? Sister, in fact, in my contact with George, I think he is very good. Not only is he knowledgeable and talented, but he is also very funny. How could Princess Mary not understand that her sister was really attracted to Earl Svent? Are you together? No, we only met a few times in total, and we didn't make it clear. Mary knew that the two of them were still in a hazy state. After chatting for a while, Princess Mary left Princess Alice's bedroom. Princess Alice knew the purpose of her sister's coming to ask her, and she could also see the royal family's attitude from the royal family's handling of the matter. Although I like George very much, as I am in the royal family, there are some things that I cannot control. In my heart, I still hope to be recognized by the royal family. After Princess Mary returned, she also told the Queen what had happened. After thinking for a long time, the Queen decided not to clarify the newspaper reports. After all, I still don't know George's attitude. I tried to win over George before, but he was not accepted. If this time it was directly published in the newspaper to say that the matter was true, it would mean moral kidnapping, and it would be unsightly to arouse the other party's resentment. If it were published in the newspaper that there was no such thing, it would be a dead end and would be even more inappropriate. But sometimes, not expressing an attitude is also an attitude. The British royal family did not speak out and allowed newspapers to report. Many people suddenly felt that the previous reports might be true. After all, silence represented acquiescence. This time, the tabloids were even more unscrupulous and directly reported the news that the two were suspected of being engaged. No matter how the outside world speculates about George and Alice, George is no longer prepared to interfere. After all, the love between children is okay, but the improvement of strength is more important. And after being delayed for a month in the UK, George was thinking about improving his strength again. First, George summarized the world that can be entered directly. The Little Boss world, the Deer and the Cauldron world, the Suicide Squad world, the Harry Potter world, and a Naruto world. Here, the world of Little Master and the Deer and the Cauldron are not helpful in improving one's own strength, so they are excluded for the time being. The DC world where Suicide Squad is located has been visited before. George also obtained the elementary artificial intelligence Monday, as well as a large amount of advanced knowledge. He also used the mirror space to steal the production method of the Speed Force, but he hasn't had time to test it yet. Next, there are Harry Potter world and Naruto world to choose from. Both worlds are good for improving strength. In addition, 2.5 years of energy has been stored in the space, and new draws can also be opened. After much consideration, biting off more than he could chew, George decided to hold on to this power and consider other things. Thank you to bookfriend 202103011065938111486, bookfriend THOR1999, bookfriend Kylan is not a demon, bookfriend Infinite Overhead, bookfriend Tiangxia Dashu, bookfriend Qingxian /me, bookfriend 20200312153320242. Thank you all book friends for your recommendation votes. Thanks. Thank you also to all book friends for your comments and collections. New books require data such as collections and recommendation votes, so all book friends, please support me. Thank you. There is another one in the afternoon, the one that is still owed. Thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 98 Speed Force. Chapter 98 Speed Force. The Speed Force is a mysterious force in the DC world. It has long been considered the source of speed. It is the source of the Flash's speed and was created by Barry Allen. This is what the inhabitants of the solar system call the speed of light. After this power is developed, you will have the ability to hit with infinite quality, speed transmission/drain casting, accelerated healing, super memory, shield creation, clone function, time travel, etc. It can be said to be very powerful. An ability. George put on the speed suit, opened the secret space door, and went directly from his room to the Sahara Desert in northern Africa. This desert is the largest sandy desert in the world, covering an area of approximately 906 million square kilometers. The climate conditions in this area are very harsh and it is one of the most unsuitable places for biological survival on Earth. So George can run freely in this desert. Without using skills, George's normal speed was tested at Mach 2, and did not reach the supersonic speed of Mach. The speed force allows people to reach the speed of light at 186,000 miles per second. The gap here is not a little big, so if it succeeds, the improvement in strength will be huge. After George was ready, he started running with all his strength, but he stopped after only running for 1 minute. The reason is that after putting on the speed suit, there is no improvement in one's own speed, let alone the special effect of generating arcs all over the body. After another test with still no results, George stopped. George knew that continuing the test would not yield good results, but George had already made a guess about the general reason, and further verification was needed. Opening the secret space door, George returned to his room. After leaving a clone in place, George's body had disappeared from the bedroom, and when he reappeared, he had arrived in the DC world of Suicide Squad. After opening the secret door in this world and coming to the Sahara Desert, the test was conducted again, but the result still failed. George returned to his home in Gotham City. This villa was bought before he came to this world to facilitate his contact with Bruce. Use the cleaning spell to clean up the villa. After changing back into his own clothes, George sat on the sofa and thought about the reasons for his failure. Previously, George suspected that the speed force was only a power unique to the DC world, so there was no response in the Marvel world. But after another test, it was clear that this was not the case. Recalling the content about the speed force, in the DC universe, not all fast DC heroes are speedsters. Speedsters only possess superhuman speed and no other abilities. So Superman is very fast, but he is not a member of the Speed Force family. Similarly, Green Lantern, who can travel through the universe at extremely fast speeds, cannot be called a speedster. In addition, characters such as Hunter Zolomon, the second generation of Reverse Flash, who achieve high speed by controlling the timeline, are not considered speedsters. It is generally believed that the Speed Force is a strange extra-dimensional space. In the DC universe, no matter how the speed is obtained, all characters related to the Speed Force are called speedsters. When they die, they become part of the Speed Force. In other words, the Speed Force is like the Temple of Heroes for the speedsters. In the DC world, Barry Allen and Wally West gained their powers during a laboratory incident, which was later set up through retroactive continuity. Barry time traveled into the past to give himself such superpowers. Bart Allen inherited the Speed Force, but must undergo experiments to prevent his power from accelerating his aging. Professor Zoom, also known as Reverse Flash, can use technology to recreate the ability to obtain the Speed Force in the distant future. Others have limited access to the Speed Force and the power within it, either through birth or special technology. Another way is to obtain the Speed Force through a drug called Speed9. Speed9 is a drug developed by Vandal Savage that gives the user the ability to gain super speed. Although the drug is powerful, it also has serious side effects. It can cause accelerated aging, easy fatigue, bloodshot eyes, daze, excessive salivation, and even death. A few years later, the impurities in the Speed9 drug were successfully purified, and the new formula no longer had terrible side effects. Thinking that other speedsters were ordinary people before they obtained the Speed Force, George thought that he might have other abilities in his body, so he could not activate the Speed Force. The definition of the Speed Force is very vague, but it is roughly an energy force from an extra dimension. After thinking about it, George felt that the energy of the Speed Force should have originally existed, but Barry Allen merged with it during the big explosion in the Star Spire laboratory. George felt the chaotic energy in his body, which seemed to represent everything, whether it was chakra, magic, or the power of Kamataj's secret method, but these energies were not the power of chaos. However, chakra and magic power are both forces that are extracted and directly integrated into one's own body. According to George's prediction, he should also be able to obtain energy like the Speed Force, but unfortunately this is not the case. Pouring himself a glass of whiskey, George tasted it slowly. Just like Ryan and others planted chakra seeds for them in order to practice chakra, George felt that he also needed to be exposed to the Speed Force before he could obtain the Speed Force. After having a direction, things became more convenient. There may be two reasons that bother me now. One is that I already have a kind of energy in my body, so I can't connect with the latitude of the Speed Force to obtain the Speed Force. The other is that I need to come into contact with this power myself. First, George caught a robber on the street at night. We don't have too many bad guys like this in Gotham City. If you experiment with this kind of person, it doesn't matter if you make any mistakes, your death will be in vain. Hey, man, where is this place and why did you bring me here? Look, man, I'm just a punk. I think we can have a good talk. George ignored the rhythmic words in the mouth of Nige, who was sitting on the ground. Instead, he took out the nano bomb he made in his spare time based on the technology provided by Bruce. It was the kind of bomb that was injected into the members of the Suicide Squad. A captured Nige was injected into the neck. Wow, what is this? Listen, brother, I can give you everything, as long as you let me go. Nige said again. Here, put this clothes on. George said to the nigger for the first time, then took out the speed suit and asked Duo Fang to put it on. Role playing? Brother, I don't like this. If you really need it, I can introduce you to a brother who likes this. Dairy is very good. Nige looked at the clothes in his hand and said in horror. When George couldn't stand it anymore, he took out a gun and prepared to make the black man suffer. Wow, that's not necessary, brother, I'll change it right away. You know what? If you say one more word, I will shut you up forever. George raised the gun in his hand and said. The other party quickly understood the current situation, shut his mouth directly, and changed his clothes honestly. Under the miraculous look in the other person's eyes, George opened the secret space door again and threw the black man and his clothes into the desert on the other side of the space door. George followed closely and crossed the space door. In order to prevent accidents, he fired 2 bang-bang shots, directly breaking the opponent's legs. Why? You'd better shut up, otherwise, the next shot might be in your head. The black gangster could only cover the wound with his hands, showing a painful expression. Now do what I say or you will die, understand? George said. I understand, I will do as you say. In fact, George could completely brainwash him and make the black gangster completely follow his own arrangements. But George didn't think it was that troublesome at all, and it wasn't worth it. Okay, now shake your hands quickly. The faster, the better. George ordered. Okay. The black man took away his hands covering the wound and shook his hands rapidly. As the black man's hands shook rapidly, their hands began to become blurred. The black man also looked confused, but his shaking hands did not stop. After his hands were blurred, wisps of red lightning flashed on the surface. George knew that the first step of his experiment was completely successful. After creating a clone on the spot, George walked step by step towards the black gangster who was immersed in the changes in his hands and didn't care about the outside world. George's body squatted down, and his hands touched the red lightning in an instant. A stream of electric light flowed along George's hands and into George's body. And George was already prepared, and the chaotic energy mobilized in his hands was also wrapped in the lightning energy. At this time, most of the body's attention was focused on the intersection of the two forces, and it naturally relaxed its vigilance towards the outside world. The black man, who had just been immersed in the changes in his hands, saw George squatting next to him. Thinking that George was paralyzed by the red lightning he carried in his hand, he suddenly felt sick. He was going to stretch his hands towards George's head, trying to electrocute George with the lightning he carried. Unfortunately, George was already prepared, and with a bang, a hole appeared in the black gangster's temple. The clone on the side didn't even look at the black man, and continued to focus on the surrounding guards. I sent this one first to make up for the missing updates. There will be another update at 30 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thanks for your support. This book is said to have words, and I will continue to write it, and I will never let it get too long. Please collect it and recommend it. End of this chapter. Chapter 99 Strength Improvement. Chapter 99 Strength Improvement. Under George's conscious observation, the wisps of red thunder and lightning, after encountering the chaotic energy, were like a drop of water blending into the sea, without causing a single ripple. The last ray of lightning also disappeared in the package of chaotic energy, as if it had never appeared. After coming back from his concentration and taking a look at the body at his feet, George stood up, as if he disliked the black gangsters for polluting the air. After taking 2 more steps to the side and standing still, George began to shake his right hand. This time, as the right hand shook, the speed became faster and faster, directly exceeding the speed of the previous experiments. Continuing to speed up, golden lightning began to appear around George's right hand. The experiment was successful and George also gained the speed force. The next step is to further develop the ability of the speed force. With the convenience of the clone technique, George believes that those extended abilities will soon be mastered by himself. After taking a look at the body lying in the desert, a fireball hit it directly. After the body was engulfed by the flames, it quickly turned into ashes. A gust of wind blew by, leaving only crystallized traces on the spot. The next second, George disappeared from this world and returned to the Marvel Universe. Because, if you only have the ability to connect, there is no need to stay here and waste energy in vain. Just a few seconds after George disappeared, a red lightning appeared here. The person coming is really Barry Allen, the Flash. Raymond, is there no problem with my position? Barry said. Cisco Ramon, a mechanical engineering genius, is the youngest member of the Star Laboratory team of scientists and a shockwave in the DC world. The location is okay, Barry, did you find anything? Cisco Ramon said. There is only a piece of crystallized ground produced by high temperature. I need to bring some samples back for testing. Barry replied. Okay, Barry. It turned out that when George controlled the gangster to generate the speed force, a speed force fluctuation alarm also appeared in the Star Laboratory. Barry, who was dating his girlfriend Iris West, immediately found an excuse and rushed over after receiving the call, but it was still a step too late. Half a year later, George, who was staying in the alchemy laboratory, disbanded all the clones in front of him. Looking at a drawing of the magic array in his hand, George showed a satisfied smile, and then looked at the results of the experiment. In the past 6 months, George has gained a lot. The first is the speed force he obtained half a year ago. With the efforts of many multiple shadow clones, George has now mastered multiple extended skills of the speed force. The first is super speed, which is the basic ability of the speed force. As long as a speedster with the speed force wants to, he can run at infinitely higher speeds. The second is speed absorption/transmission. George can absorb the kinetic energy of things to increase his own speed. Similarly, George can also transfer speed to others. The third is the ability to accelerate healing. George can use the speed force to accelerate the healing factors in people's bodies, allowing the body to recover quickly. This ability can also be used on others. When George originally gained the ability of corpse veins, he had already gained the ability to heal himself. Now coupled with the accelerated healing ability brought by the speed force, it can be said that George's current self-healing ability absolutely surpasses Wolverine. The fourth is super perception. George can now sense everything moving on the entire Hogwarts Island through the speed force. Of course, there is still a long way to go before those speedsters in the DC universe can perceive the whole world and even perceive the existence of others across time and space. However, as George continues to practice, George believes that he can reach that level in the future. The fifth is super thinking speed. The speed force gives George extremely fast thinking speed and can calculate a variety of possible results in a very short time. This made George, who was already thinking very fast, reach a terrifying level of thinking. Now, the memory impact caused by the clone has no impact on George at all. The sixth is the ability to fly. George can now fly with the help of the Speed Force. But this ability was blessed by George on the bone wings, and there was no need to create a Speed Force pedal to fly into the sky like Barry Allen. The seventh is the shield. George can use the Speed Force to deflect things approaching him. The eighth was to create structures. George discovered that if he concentrated, he could use the Speed Force to create solid structures. This was after George's clothes were damaged when he was running. George thought that it would be better if the clothes were stronger, and then the damaged areas would be repaired naturally. Then George conducted many experiments based on this point and concluded the ability to create structures. The ninth is muscle growth. George can temporarily provide him with super strength through the ability to accelerate the rate of his muscle growth, but this will cause George to become exhausted after a short time. The 10th is self-molecule control. George can completely control the kinetic energy of his own molecules at the molecular level. When he needs to enter or pass through a solid object, they only need to adjust the vibration frequency of their own molecules to the same vibration frequency as the vibration frequency of the object's molecules. It can be done. He's a little less controllable at first, so when solid objects come into contact with Wally, the objects tend to explode. Later, when George internalized the chaotic energy into his body, he would cause objects to dissolve if he didn't concentrate enough. George discovered that when used for attack, this skill could be used to disrupt a person's molecular machinery to the point of near disintegration. But after constant contact, George can now control this ability with complete ease. Those failed experiences were also developed into relevant attack capabilities. In fact, there are some abilities that George knows about but has not developed, such as the clone ability. George's shadow clone can achieve an effect that is not inferior to that of the Speed Force clone. There is also the ability to have a photographic memory, an ability that George already possesses. There are two other abilities that George has not experimented with. One is time travel, which George has no idea to test yet, and the other is infinite mass boxing. This kind of boxing at near light speed has a power equivalent to the explosion of a white dwarf star. In fact, according to George's calculations, if a punch with such a speed of light was really struck, the only possible impact would be to create a black hole, which would then absorb and destroy all surrounding matter. So if you want to reach the level where the power of a punch is equivalent to the explosion of a white dwarf star, you don't need to punch at the speed of light at all, as long as it is close to the speed of light. There is also another Speed Force ability, which is to fight the anti-life equation. This ability cannot be verified for the time being. It's a pity that George didn't watch the Flash TV series in his previous life, otherwise he would have learned more ways to use the Speed Force. George estimates that none of the Flashes in the Suicide Squad parallel world have developed so many abilities. Moreover, after George developed these abilities, George is now powerful enough to defeat the Avengers except Scarlet Witch, including Thor. Of course, Captain Marvel is excluded here. After all, Captain Marvel should not be considered a member of the Avengers. Why should we exclude the Scarlet Witch? Because the Scarlet Witch is unreasonably powerful and has the ability to rewrite reality. However, George also has a way to deal with the opponent. The specific methods need to be tested after the opponent appears. As for the other members of the Avengers, it goes without saying. There is no doubt that in terms of strength alone, George's current strength may not be as powerful as the Hulk, but if he punches at nearly the speed of light, even the Hulk will have to kneel. From a strength level, this punch will definitely reach the sky. Parent level. In terms of speed, even Captain Marvel is a little behind. After all, Captain Marvel's fastest speed is only super light speed. End of this chapter. Chapter 100 Ability Lending 1. Chapter 100 Ability Lending 1. The various abilities developed by the Speed Force are actually just one of the gains that George has gained from his efforts in the past 6 months. The bigger gain was the magic circle drawing in George's hands. This drawing was finally designed after George developed super thinking, combined with Comitage Mystic's method of borrowing Wetian Emperor's energy, knowledge of magic circles in the Harry Potter world, and runes. Plan. In the Marvel world, with very few exceptions, all mages in this world do not need any qualification requirements. These people are able to learn and perform magic because they borrow magic power from the corresponding latitude demon. And George himself is a special latitude demon. It's just that his current energy is too little, and those truly ancient latitude demons are not what he can match now. Like Dormammu, who is in charge of the dark latitude, the total amount of energy he possesses, compared with George's current total amount of chaotic energy, is simply the difference between an ocean and a drop of water. This difference is not a billion points. Simply relying on chaos beads to absorb chaos energy from space every day is too slow. When will the entire space be expanded to become as huge as the universe? Therefore, George has been thinking about more efficient ways to increase energy. There are two ways in George's plan. One is the tip he got from the universe Rubik's Cube, which is to let the chaotic space absorb pure external energy and convert it into chaotic energy to expand the total amount of energy. This kind of pure energy, in addition to the cosmic Rubik's Cube, George also thought of the new element arc reactor of Iron Man in the future, and the energy blocks held by Sovereign in the universe. Unfortunately, these pure energy blocks are currently unavailable. The second method that George thought of was Kamataj's magic loan, which is also a common method used by the latitude demon to strengthen himself. Through a special contract method, ordinary people are allowed to borrow their own power to perform magic, and then they are allowed to double their practice and return it to increase their total magic power. Just like bank loans, banks can make a lot of money through loans. And George, one of the largest shareholders of the Federal Reserve in the United States, knows this very well. In the past 6 months, George has been studying a leak-cutting mode similar to other latitude demons. Through this plan, George can lend his magic power to others, so that others can also have magic power to perform magic. Of course, preventive measures must be taken here, otherwise it will be very troublesome if you encounter someone like Guyi who only borrows money but never returns it. Fortunately, when I was at Kamal Taj, I saw a lot of books in the library. Among them, in order to allow ordinary mystics to quickly cast magic, there are books that introduce in detail how to borrow magic power. After half a year of constant trying, I finally made such a magic circle. Lending magic power is actually a kind of contract magic. You sign a contract, borrow magic power and then give back magic power. If you violate the contract, you will be punished. The method used by George is actually not complicated. It is to use this magic circle to connect the borrower with the chaotic energy in George's space. George has already set up magic in the magic circle in advance. As long as the borrower uses his mental power to sense the energy and then activates the corresponding rune, the magic can be released directly. Here George draws on knowledge from alchemy. In this magic circle, all the magic has been drawn by George himself in advance, and can be redrawn as needed. The initial version was still in the style of a magic circle, with an early warning rune set by George. This rune was a passive rune. It will be on at all times. Once a crisis is predicted, it will automatically activate the second rune, the energy shield, thus protecting the owner's life. The third magic is the speed rune. After activating this rune, you can have the speed power to a limited extent. Of course, the limit here is also the threshold preset by George, which will only allow the user to reach Mach 1 level, which is 340 meters per second. George set this value for a reason. According to the formula, when a normal shock wave is generated by flying at Mach 25 in an environment of 1.4 degrees Celsius, the temperature can reach 100 degrees, which can boil people. The corresponding speed of Mach 25 at 1.4 degrees Celsius is approximately 486 m/s. It is conservatively estimated that a naked person can withstand a speed of more than 400 m/s in the atmosphere for a short period of time. Therefore, George also obtained the method of making the material that Cisco Ramon used to make the uniform for the Flash in the Star Laboratory. In fact, that material is a new fireproof material developed by Cisco Ramon for firefighters. So the cost is not expensive, but the technology is still not up to the current technical level. However, this is just beyond the reach of the current technical level. George has already made some such materials in that world before. Compared with the red of the Flash, George made a matte black, which is more suitable for the color matching of combat uniforms. So by directly using the copying spell, you can say how much of this material is needed. According to the setting of the Speed Force, every speedster will merge with the Speed Force after death, expanding the Speed Force. In addition, George discovered through these 6 months of contact that George is like a generator when running. Provide a continuous supply of energy to the Speed Force. The generated Speed Force will also be slowly converted into chaotic energy, but the conversion ratio is relatively small. But this is also a way to actively increase chaotic energy. The fourth rune is the transformation spell. With the blessing of chaotic energy, this spell can basically be used at will in a continent. But for ordinary people, the experience will not be very good. George has only carved these runes for the time being. Holding this magic circle, George came out of the alchemy room. After changing into a set of clothes that were convenient for going out, George turned around and appeared on the streets of New York. The time now is mid-March 1936. Although there is George's help, the impact of the entire Great Depression is clearly reflected in the people around him. It can only be said that the impact of the Great Depression in New York has been somewhat mitigated. However, there are still many people looking for work on the streets. George disappeared and let go of his perception. In an instant, the entire block was invisible to George's perception. The next moment, George appeared behind a robbery NIGE. After this ragged black man knocked out a white girl from behind, he couldn't help but snatch the food bag from the girl, and was about to reach into the girl's clothes, which would be the way to kill her. George has no burden whatsoever about using such scum for experiments. After knocking the black man unconscious, George put the black man into the space, and then used the healing spell to wake up the girl lying on the ground. You must know that the force used by the black man in that stick was not small. After hard work, the black man was so hungry that he didn't have much strength. Otherwise, if he hit it with all his strength, the girl would definitely be killed. But now, everything has been changed by George. After the girl woke up, she touched the place where she was knocked. Then he touched the blood on his hand and was immediately frightened and screamed. He immediately stood up and prepared to run forward, but after taking only 2 steps, he immediately rushed back, picked up the food bag that fell on the ground, turned around and ran towards a house in the distance. After watching the girl wake up, George teleported away from the street. George returned to the alchemy room again, released the black man, and used cleaning to clean the black man. Otherwise, George would never be able to stand the smell of a tattoo on him. George did not wake him up, but directly cast the memory spell and began to modify the black man's memory. The memory that George instilled in the black man was to completely obey George's orders. Then George used the transformation technique to create a long needle, and then poured magic into the long needle, and began to tattoo the black man's arm. Soon, a magic circle appeared on the black man's arm. This was just the first step. After George woke up the black man showed a dazed look at first. After looking back and seeing George, he immediately stood up and bowed, "Master." "Well, now focus on the tattoo on your arm," George ordered. "As you command, Master." Then the black man turned his arm slightly and stared at the magic circle carefully. At this time, as the black man focused his attention on the magic circle, the blood stains that appeared during the tattoo began to gather towards the center of the magic circle, and then with a flash of light, all the blood stains disappeared. George, who was standing next to him, also felt a weak connection between himself and the black man's tattoo. "Okay, now you should be able to sense the magic circle, right?" George asked. "Yes, Master," the black man returned. "Well, then, stand still and don't move." After saying that, George directly picked up an M1911 pistol and shot the black man in the middle of the chest. When the bullets were about to focus on the black people, a transparent barrier appeared around the black people and stopped the bullets for the black people. In other words, there is no problem with the first and second runes. Don't resist. Yes, Master. The next moment, George waved his hand and directly used his mental power to draw the black man into the space. Okay, now try to activate the third rune and run. Yes, Master. After answering, the black man started running around the boundary of the space. This semicircular space with a radius of 110 meters has a circumference of 690.8 meters. Soon the black man ran for a week, and then the speed became faster and faster. Red lightning appeared around the black man, so the third rune was no problem. Okay, stop. As George gave the order, the black figure also stopped. Now activate the fourth rune, concentrate, and think about that place over there. George pointed to a place on the opposite side. Yes, Master. The moment the black man finished speaking, the black man disappeared from the place and reappeared at the opposite location. But the moment he appeared, the black man fell to the ground. After George turned the black man over with his feet, he saw that the black man's lips were white and blood was flowing from all his orifices. George just took one look and knew that this was because black people were in poor health, and then they were asked to do these tests, so they couldn't bear it either physically or mentally, so this situation happened. However, George was not prepared to save him, even if he helped George test the accuracy of the magic circle. In order to maximize the function, the black man could also test an ability for George. George's palm shook rapidly, and the next moment he touched the black man directly turned into nothingness. This is the molecular control ability that George experimented on black people, and the black people were directly decomposed. The moment the black man disappeared, George felt that the trace of connection also disappeared. Thank you all book friends for your recommendation votes and collections. Thank you all. Hold your fist. End of this chapter. Chapter 101 Ability Lending 2. Chapter 101 Ability Lending 2. The experiment just now was just a preliminary test. In terms of the bank's lending process, only the lending part was completed. Later, we still need to test how George can ensure that he can control the energy of the loan and whether the borrower can repay the loan smoothly. These two experiments were relatively simple, and two black gangsters were captured from New York City. Well, as for why they are all black gangsters, it's very simple. The people George happened to meet were all black people. This is definitely not racial discrimination. George can definitely swear to God that what he hates most in his life is racial discrimination and black people. Footpot chicken. Footpot chicken is a chicken, not a human. After testing, the use of the magic circle can fully achieve the expected results. Even if the user of the magic circle has the magic circle tattooed on his body and then successfully signs the contract, it does not mean that he can borrow as much magic power as he wants. First of all, George set a total amount of energy in each magic circle, which allows each contractor to use 20 spells. Then the contractor needs to spend time meditating through the magic circle, and then double the magic channels through the magic circle. Times return. However, in the contractor's perception, they only stored the magic power in the magic circle. Moreover, George is not worried that someone who is interested will obtain the magic circle and escape from his control. Because George set the real name with runes in this magic circle. When the contract is completed, the contractor will automatically contract with George. George can also control the energy borrowed. If he encounters Master Guyi who only borrows but never repays, he will not be able to borrow again after consuming the energy in the magic circle for the first time. Moreover, the magic circle is also equivalent to a locator, and George can sense the contractor's location at any time. Incredible! This is simply amazing. Ryan looked at the tattoo on his upper arm. This tattoo is a pattern formed after George redesigned the magic circle. The pattern is guarded by two western dragons grabbing each side of a shield with their dragon claws. On the shield is the Bauhinia flower standard of the Svent family. After achieving success on black people, George found Lane. After explaining the purpose of the tattoo to him, Lane became George's first contractor. As George's most reassuring person, of course the tattoo Ryan received would not only have 4 spells painted on it, but 6. In addition to the inherent 4, there are also flames raging and healing as before. This is magic, making the impossible possible. You should get familiar with it slowly first. After you are fully familiar with your abilities, I will improve the strength of all team members. Of course, ordinary team members will only have 4 spells, the captain level will have 5 spells including healing. Understood, I will arrange the personnel. Ryan replied. George had complete trust in Ryan, not only because of his parents' final entrustment, but also because of Ryan's performance over the years, which had always been silent support for George. For the things George told me, I never asked the reason, and would only do my best to complete them. Therefore, George has always been relieved when leaving the entire combat department in Ryan's hands. But there are so many superpowers in this world that it's hard to guard against them. In order to prevent Ryan from being controlled by others one day, or coming into contact with the Skrulls and having their memories taken away, George actually added a clemency to each badge to ensure that the team members would not be mentally controlled. PL Security has developed over the years and now has 1,100 Dragon Warriors. These warriors have been planted with vitality seeds by George and can perform transformation and substitution techniques. In fact, the greater role of vitality is in physical training. In the original Naruto world, Xiao Li and Ye Kai continued to improve their physical strength through physical training and became famous among countless ninjas. Kai almost kicked out of the finale. George himself didn't have any skills, so he could only let his subordinates continue to develop physical skills. But the results are still good, and now these team members have reached the ultimate quality of ordinary people. Coupled with the fighting and shooting techniques taught by George, he is definitely a force that cannot be ignored. Moreover, George is planning to contract all these 1,000 people in the next step, so that the strength of these people will be greatly improved. Of course, George wouldn't just let these people train over the years. They receive a lot of security business every year, and this group of people are now mainly responsible for the life security tasks of most of the richest people in the United States. PL Security also has nearly 1 ordinary security personnel in the United States. These security personnel have undergone strict screening and arduous training. At least in combat and shooting training, everyone was excellent. Some of them were arranged by Ryan to protect George's properties scattered in the United States and Europe, and some were responsible for connecting with the police departments and helping some police departments deal with the most vicious elements. Of course, when encountering some difficult situations, the Dragon Warrior will also cooperate to deal with them. After chatting with George about some arrangements of the security company, Ryan left the castle. In the later stage, George will also equip the Dragon team with unique special combat uniforms so that they can familiarize themselves with the abilities they have acquired. As long as these people lend their energy to him, George believes that his energy will soon become rich. On Monday, tell Fred for me and ask him to come over. George said to the heir. As you command, Master. A mechanical voice sounded. Since the artificial intelligence was installed on Monday, George's castle has basically achieved the unity of magic and technology. As the steward of the castle, little Fred naturally discovered this early. George just introduced Monday to him and let them communicate on their own. Sir, little Fred said and stood there waiting for George's orders. Well, help me give this plan to Paul. He will know what to do with the rest. George said. Okay, sir. Do you have any other orders? Little Fred said. No, you go down first. Okay, sir. After saying that, little Fred exited the room. What George just handed to little Fred was a plan for privately operating a prison. Prisons in the United States began to be privately run after the Civil War. At that time, black slaves were emancipated and there were no more free slaves. Naturally, some people's interests were harmed. At this time, some people began to fight against the prisoners in the prison. Idea. George didn't care about prison at first, but considering energy acquisition, George now thought of free labor, those who were imprisoned for life. George is planning to let Paul build a number of private prisons. Some of them are serious criminals. George feels that he can use his spirit to help them reform. George plans to use a large wooden box to use the invisible stretch spell to build a large prison. All the people in the prison will be brainwashed by George and then given the speed of a junior speedster. Then they accumulate energy through their running. These criminals can only exchange food by running, and the ones who run the worst will be eliminated. As for what will happen after they are eliminated, haha, of course they will return to chaotic energy. In the DC world, the speedster will return to the Speed Force after death and merge with the Speed Force. In the Marvel world, the Speed Force is just a manifestation of chaotic energy, and returning to the Speed Force means returning to chaotic energy. Once again, a large number of clones were divided and asked to build a large enough prison. The main body poured a glass of wine and came to the balcony. End of this chapter.